Victoria Langford stood soaking wet in a strange man's doorway at midnight, mascara streaking down her face, finally ready to admit she'd been wrong about everything. The billionaire attorney who spent her entire life believing children were deal breakers was about to confess she'd fallen in love with a broke single father and his 6-year-old son. But before we get there, you need to understand how a woman worth $2 billion ended up standing in the rain outside a cramped Seattle apartment, terrified and hopeful at the same time. If you want to see how this impossible love story ends, stick around until the final part. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Rainier Tavern wasn't the kind of place Victoria Langford normally spent her Friday nights. Hell, it wasn't the kind of place she'd even notice while driving past in her Mercedes. Dim lighting, scratched wooden bar top, sports playing on a television that probably hadn't been replaced since 2008. The whole place smelled like beer and old carpet. But tonight, after 14 straight hours of depositions and 3 conference calls that should have been emails, Victoria didn't want ambient lighting and craft cocktails. She wanted somewhere nobody would recognize her, somewhere she could sit alone and drink bourbon without some tech executive trying to pitch her his app or some junior partner kissing her ass. She'd found a corner stool, ordered a Maker's Mark neat, and spent 20 minutes scrolling through work emails when someone sat down 2 seats away. Victoria didn't look up immediately. She'd perfected the art of radiating fuck-off energy in public spaces, shoulders angled away, eyes on her phone, the universal body language for not interested. Rough week? The voice was male, casual, not trying too hard. Victoria's jaw tightened. She didn't look over. Something like that. Yeah, I feel you. She heard him order a beer. Domestic, nothing fancy. Feels like Friday took about 6 years to arrive. Victoria made a non-committal sound and kept her eyes on her phone, even though she wasn't actually reading anything anymore. Most men would have taken the hint by now. Most men would have moved down the bar or gone back to their own business. Sorry, the voice said after a moment. Didn't mean to interrupt your night. I'll shut up. Something in his tone made her glance over. Not defensive, not wounded ego passive-aggressive, just genuine. The man sitting 2 stools down was probably in his early 30s, wearing a plain gray Henley with a small stain near the collar that he'd clearly tried to scrub out. Dark hair that needed a trim, tired eyes that probably matched her own. And on his jacket, hanging on the back of his stool, was a bright purple crayon mark that definitely hadn't come from any boardroom. Victoria found herself staring at that crayon mark longer than she meant to. Kid? She asked, nodding toward the jacket. The man followed her gaze and laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, 6 years old and already a master artist. I've given up on keeping my clothes clean. How old? Oliver just turned 6 last month. Had a dinosaur-themed birthday party in our apartment. There's still streamers stuck to the ceiling that I can't reach. Victoria took a sip of her bourbon. That sounds chaotic. That's one word for it. The man smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that felt unfamiliar to Victoria. Wouldn't trade it for anything, though. There was a pause. Victoria should have gone back to her phone, should have reinforced the walls. Instead, she heard herself ask, Just you and him? Yeah, just us. His mom left when he was 2. The man said it matter-of-factly, without bitterness or self-pity. Been figuring it out on our own ever since. Victoria's first thought came out before her filter could stop it. Must make dating complicated. You could say that. The man took a drink of his beer and Victoria saw something flicker across his face. Not anger. Something closer to resignation. Most women aren't interested once they find out I've got a kid. Or if they are interested, they're not interested in him. Just want to work around him like he's an inconvenient detail. Smart women, Victoria said, and immediately regretted it. The man looked at her then, really looked at her, and Victoria felt something uncomfortable shift in her chest. His expression wasn't hurt or offended. It was curious, like he'd just discovered something interesting. You really believe that? He asked. I believe that a child is a package deal, Victoria said, her voice cooler now, back in control. And most people don't want to come second place to someone else's kid. That's just reality. Second place. The man repeated the words slowly like he was tasting them. Is that what you think it is? Isn't it? No. He said it simply, definitively. It's not a competition. That's not how it works. Victoria felt her walls going up, the familiar armor she wore in courtrooms and boardrooms. I've seen how it works. Kids need attention, time, energy, money. They're a full-time commitment. Anyone coming into that situation is always going to be secondary. Sounds like you've got it all figured out. The man's voice was still calm, still curious, not challenging her, just listening. How many single parents have you dated? None. Then how do you know? Victoria set her glass down harder than she meant to. Common sense, logic. I've seen it play out 100 times with colleagues, clients, friends, but not yourself. No, not myself. So you're making assumptions based on other people's experiences. I'm making observations based on patterns, Victoria shot back. That's what I do for a living. I'm an attorney. I deal in facts. The man nodded slowly, and infuriatingly he smiled. Not condescending, not smug, just amused, maybe. Okay, attorney. I'm Mason, by the way. Since we're having a debate and all. Victoria hesitated. Giving her name felt like opening a door she'd meant to keep closed. Victoria. Nice to meet you, Victoria. Mason raised his beer slightly in acknowledgement. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. When you make these observations, these patterns you mentioned, do you ever test them, or do you just accept them as truth and move on? Victoria's eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? I'm saying that maybe you're wrong. Mason said it without arrogance, without heat, just a statement. Maybe what you think you know about kids and relationships is based on incomplete information. And you're an expert on relationships? Victoria couldn't keep the skepticism out of her voice. You just told me most women don't want to date you because of your son. Most women don't, Mason agreed. But the ones who actually give it a chance, the ones who meet Oliver, spend time with us, see what our life actually looks like instead of assuming, those women usually realize it's not about coming in second place at all. Then what's it about? Mason looked at her for a long moment, and Victoria felt something dangerous in that gaze. Something that made her want to look away and keep looking at the same time. Spend time with us, he said quietly. Then decide if you still believe what you believe. Victoria laughed, but it came out sharper than she intended. You're asking me to go out with you. You don't even know me. I know you've been working yourself to death all week. I know you came to a dive bar by yourself to avoid people. I know you've got walls up so high, I'm surprised you can see over them. Mason paused. And I know you're still sitting here talking to me instead of walking away. So yeah, I'm asking. Coffee. No pressure. Just a conversation. I don't date men with kids. I'm not asking you to date me. I'm asking if you want coffee. It's the same thing. Is it? Mason's smile was infuriating in its calmness. Or are you just scared you might be wrong about something? Victoria felt heat rise in her chest. I'm not scared of anything. Then prove it. Mason stood, pulling his jacket off the back of his stool, crayon mark and all. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. There's a coffee shop on Pike called Ground Control. If you show up, great. If you don't, no harm done. I'll buy Oliver the donut he's been asking for and forget this conversation ever happened. He pulled a 20 from his wallet and left it on the bar, covering both his beer and Victoria's bourbon. Before she could protest, he was already heading toward the door. Mason, Victoria called out before she could stop herself. He turned back. Why? She asked. Why would you waste your time on someone who's already told you this won't work? Mason's smile was different this time. Softer. Sadder, maybe. Because I've learned that the best things in life are usually the ones we're most afraid of. Then he was gone, and Victoria was left alone at the bar with an empty glass and a business card he'd somehow slipped onto the counter. Mason Cole. Structural engineer. She should throw it away. Should finish her drink, go home, forget this entire conversation. She had a huge case starting Monday. She didn't have time for coffee with a broke single dad and his kid. Victoria stared at the card for a long time. Then she put it in her purse. The next morning, Victoria woke up in her penthouse apartment with every intention of going to the gym, reviewing case files, and absolutely not going to some coffee shop on Pike Street to meet a man she'd barely spoken to. She made it until 9:30 before admitting to herself that she was going. Ground Control was exactly the kind of place Victoria usually avoided. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, A chalkboard menu with drink names that tried too hard to be clever. But it was clean, not too crowded, and when she walked in at 10:03 a.m., she spotted Mason immediately. He was sitting at a corner table with a little boy who was currently explaining something very seriously, while gesturing wildly with both hands. Oliver. The kid was small for 6, all elbows and energy, wearing a striped shirt that was on backward and light-up sneakers that were definitely on the wrong feet. His hair stuck up in 3 different directions, and he had what looked like jelly on his cheek. Mason saw her first. His whole face changed. Surprise, then something warmer. Relief, maybe. "You came," he said as she approached. "I'm still deciding if that was a mistake." Victoria kept her voice neutral, professional, the armor firmly in place. "Fair enough." Mason gestured to the empty chair. "Oliver, this is Victoria. She's the friend I told you about." Oliver looked up at her with eyes that were too big for his face and said, "Do you like crows?" Victoria blinked. What?" "Crows," Oliver repeated, as if it was the most important question in the world. "Do you like them? Because there's one that lives in the park by our house, and his name is Winston, and he's my best friend, but Dad says Winston probably has lots of other bird friends too, but I think I'm his favorite because I bring him crackers." Mason was trying not to laugh. "Oliver, maybe let Victoria sit down first before you start the Winston presentation." "But it's important," Oliver insisted. "What if she doesn't like crows? That's need-to-know information, Dad." Victoria found herself sitting down without consciously deciding to. "I don't have strong feelings about crows one way or another." Oliver's face fell slightly. "Oh." "But," Victoria added, surprising herself, "I've never had a crow as a friend before, so I'm open to learning why they're worth liking." Oliver's entire face lit up like she'd just handed him $1 million. "Okay, so first of all, they're super smart. Like, smarter than most dogs. And Winston can recognize my face even though there's like 1 billion people in Seattle. And one time he brought me a bottle cap as a present, and Dad says that means he likes me. And also they can talk kind of like parrots, except they choose not to because they're mysterious. And Oliver," Mason interrupted gently. "Breathe, buddy." The kid took a dramatic breath, but his smile never wavered. "Can I tell her about the time Winston stole a French fry from that mean guy?" "Maybe after Victoria gets her coffee." Mason looked at her with an expression that seemed to say, "I warned you this would be chaotic." Victoria ordered a black coffee from the teenager behind the counter, ignoring the overly complicated menu, and returned to the table where Oliver was now drawing on a napkin with a green crayon he'd apparently been hiding in his pocket. "That's Winston," Oliver announced, holding up a drawing that looked more like a blob with legs than a bird. "And that's me, and that's Dad, and that's you." Victoria looked at the stick figure that was apparently meant to be her. It had angry eyebrows and spiky hair. "Why do I look mad?" "Because you looked mad when you walked in," Oliver said matter-of-factly. "But you look less mad now, so I'll fix it." He carefully erased the eyebrows and redrew them. "There. Now you look normal." "Oliver," Mason said, his voice carrying a warning. "What?" "I'm just being honest. You always say honesty is good." "Honesty is good. Tact is also good." "What's tact?" "It's when you're honest, but you don't say things that might hurt people's feelings." Oliver considered this seriously. "Did I hurt your feelings?" he asked Victoria. "No," Victoria said, and realized she meant it. "I did look mad when I walked in." "Why?" "Because I wasn't sure I wanted to be here." "But you came anyway?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Oliver," Mason cut in again, "maybe give Victoria some space before you interrogate her." "I'm not I'm not doing that thing. I'm just asking questions. You said questions are good." "They are. In moderation." Oliver sighed deeply, with the weight of someone far older than 6. "Adults have so many rules." Victoria found herself almost smiling. Almost. They stayed at the coffee shop for an hour. Oliver talked about Winston, about the construction site near his school where he watched cranes every day, about his teacher Ms. Patterson who let him bring in a rock collection for show and tell. Mason mostly listened, occasionally steering the conversation when Oliver got too far off track, throwing in gentle corrections when the kids' stories got too exaggerated. Victoria mostly observed, Watch the way Mason's hand automatically steadied Oliver's juice box before it tipped over, the way he knew without asking that Oliver didn't like the crusts on his banana bread, the quiet patience when Oliver interrupted him for the dozenth time. "Do you have kids?" Oliver asked her at one point. "No." "Do you want kids?" "Oliver," Mason warned. "I'm just asking." Victoria met the kid's eyes. "I don't know." "That's okay," Oliver said generously. "Dad says it's okay not to know stuff. Except math. Math you have to know or Miss Patterson gets disappointed." When they finally left the coffee shop, Oliver running ahead to look at a dog tied up outside, Mason walked beside Victoria in silence for a moment. "So," he said finally, "still think kids mean coming in second place?" Victoria watched Oliver, who was now crouched down, asking the dog's owner 17 questions about what kind of dog it was and whether it liked squeaky toys. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that your son has more energy than should be legally allowed in one small human." Mason laughed. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting today." "Fair enough." Mason paused as they reached the corner where Victoria had parked. "Same time next week?" "I didn't agree to next week." "You didn't say no either." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense. His clothes were worn, his car was probably older than Oliver, and she'd bet money his apartment was tiny and cramped. He had nothing she usually looked for in men, nothing that made sense on paper. But he also wasn't looking at her like she was Victoria Langford, attorney at law, worth $2 billion. He was just looking at her like she was a person he found interesting. It had been a long time since anyone looked at her like that. "Maybe," Victoria heard herself say. Mason's smile was slow and genuine. "I'll take maybe." Oliver came running back, breathless and happy. "Dad, Dad, that dog's name is Pancake. Can we get a dog named Pancake?" "We've talked about this, buddy. Our apartment doesn't allow dogs." "What about a small dog? Like a really, really small dog?" "Still a dog." "What about a cat?" "Also no." "What about a fish?" "We'll talk about it." Oliver turned to Victoria. "Are you coming next week?" Victoria hesitated. "Maybe." "That's what Dad says when he means yes, but doesn't want to promise." "Oliver," Mason said, trying not to smile, "it's true. Last week you said maybe about pizza for dinner, and we totally had pizza." Victoria looked at Mason, who shrugged helplessly. The kid's not wrong. Despite herself, despite everything, Victoria felt something crack in her chest, something small but significant. "Okay," she said, "next week." Oliver fist-pumped like he'd just won the lottery. "Yes, can we go back to the same coffee place? They have good banana bread." "We'll see," Mason said, but he was looking at Victoria when he said it. They parted ways at the corner. Victoria walked to her Mercedes while Mason and Oliver headed toward a beat-up Honda that had definitely seen better days. As she unlocked her car, she heard Oliver's voice carry across the parking lot. "Dad, I like her. She seems mean but not actually mean. Just pretend mean." "Oliver, don't yell that across parking lots." "Why not?" "Because Victoria can probably still hear you." Victoria smiled to herself as she got in her car. The kid wasn't wrong about that either. Monday morning arrived with the force of a freight train. Victoria was in her office by 6 a.m., reviewing briefs for the Mackenzie case, a corporate merger dispute that would have been straightforward if both parties weren't being represented by assholes who billed $800 an hour to argue about semicolons. By 9 a.m., she was in a conference room surrounded by junior associates who all looked terrified of her, which was good. Fear kept people sharp. "The timeline's wrong," Victoria said, not looking up from the document in front of her. Section 3, paragraph 7. The acquisition date is listed as March 14th. It was March 15th. Fix it. "But the difference is just one day," one of the associates, Miller, fresh out of Stanford, said carefully. "Does it really matter?" Victoria's eyes snapped up. "Does it matter? Does precision matter in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit where the opposing counsel is looking for any reason to shred our credibility?" "Yes, Miller, it fucking matters." Miller's face went pale. "Right. Sorry, I'll fix it." "You'll do more than fix it. You'll go through every single date, time, and number in this entire brief and verify them against source documents. If I find one more error, you're off this case. Yes, ma'am. Victoria went back to her notes, but she could feel the tension in the room. Good. Let them be tense. Tense meant careful. Careful meant they wouldn't fuck up again. The meeting ran until noon. By the time everyone cleared out, Victoria's assistant Sarah appeared in the doorway with a salad Victoria didn't remember ordering and a knowing look Victoria definitely didn't appreciate. You're in a mood, Sarah observed. I'm always in a mood. It's called having standards. It's called being scary. Sarah set the salad down on Victoria's desk. Half the associates think you're going to fire them. Maybe I will. You won't. They're too useful. Sarah paused. You also have 3 messages from the Hendricks firm trying to schedule settlement talks, and your mother called. Victoria's jaw tightened. Tell Hendricks I'll consider settlement when they stop lowballing my client, and tell my mother I'm busy. I already told her you're busy. She said she'll just keep calling until you answer. Then turn off my phone. You know that doesn't actually stop her. Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose. Fine. What does she want? The usual. Wants to know why you're not married yet. Wants to remind you that your cousin Jennifer just had her second baby. Wants to tell you about some son of her friend who works in finance and would be perfect for you. I'd rather eat glass. I'll let her know you're busy with prior commitments. Do that. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. You doing okay, boss? Victoria looked up, surprised. What? You just seem, I don't know, different today. More wound up than usual. I'm fine. Okay. Sarah didn't sound convinced, but she knew better than to push. Let me know if you need anything. When she was gone, Victoria sat back in her chair and stared at the Seattle skyline through her office windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass, 20th floor, a view that costs more than most people's houses. She should feel satisfied. The Mackenzie case was going well. Her client list was full. She'd made partner at 30, which was practically unheard of. Everything she'd worked for was right here in this office. So why did she feel so fucking empty? Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Oliver wants to know if you've thought about crows today. Victoria stared at the message. Then, before she could overthink it, she typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Mason, got your number from the business card you left on the table at the coffee shop. Hope that's okay. If not, just tell me and I'll delete it. And Victoria looked at her desk. She had left a card. Not intentionally, or maybe it had been intentional. She honestly wasn't sure anymore. It's fine, she typed back. So, crows? Despite everything, despite the shitty morning and the incompetent associates and her mother's relentless judgment, Victoria felt her mouth twitch. I haven't thought about crows. Oliver will be devastated. He spent 20 minutes this morning telling me facts about crow intelligence that I'm pretty sure he made up. Are you texting me during work hours to talk about your son's crow obsession? I'm texting you during my lunch break to make sure you didn't spend the last 3 days convincing yourself that coffee with us was a terrible idea. Victoria's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She should shut this down. Should be professional. Should remind him that she was busy and important and didn't have time for random texts about birds. It might have been a terrible idea, she typed instead. But you haven't decided yet? No. Good. Then Saturday still works? Victoria closed her eyes. She had a deposition to prep for Saturday. She had case files to review. She had a million things that mattered more than coffee with a man she barely knew. What time? 10 a.m. Same place. Oliver's already planning his Winston presentation. There's a presentation? There's always a presentation. The kid doesn't do anything halfway. Victoria found herself smiling at her phone like an idiot, which was ridiculous. She was 30 years old and texting about a 6-year-old's crow presentation like it was the most important thing on her calendar. Fine. Saturday, 10 a.m. Looking forward to it. Victoria set her phone down and tried to focus on work. She made it 15 minutes before she picked it up again and read the messages 3 more times. This was dangerous. This was stupid, but she was going anyway. Saturday came too fast and too slow at the same time. Victoria changed her outfit 4 times, settling finally on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Mason's entire wardrobe, but at least looked casual enough not to scream, I'm trying too hard. She arrived at ground control at 9:57 a.m. and immediately regretted every decision that had led to this moment. Mason and Oliver were already there, sitting at the same corner table. Oliver was wearing a cape, an actual goddamn cape made from what looked like an old bedsheet, and holding what appeared to be a 3-ring binder. "You brought visual aids?" Victoria asked as she approached. Oliver looked up, his face serious. "Dad said if I'm going to teach you about crows, I should be organized, so I made a binder." "You made a binder?" "Well, Dad helped with the hole puncher, but the pictures are all mine." Victoria sat down and accepted the cup of black coffee Mason slid across the table to her. "You remembered how I take my coffee. You said it pretty definitively last week. Didn't seem like something that would change." Oliver was already flipping open his binder. "Okay, so first, this is a drawing of Winston, and this is a drawing of Winston's family. I don't actually know if Winston has a family, but Mrs. Patterson says all living things have families, so probably he does." For the next 45 minutes, Victoria listened to a 6-year-old's surprisingly detailed lecture on crow behavior, intelligence, and social structures. Some of it was accurate. A lot of it was definitely not. But Oliver delivered every fact with such earnest conviction that Victoria found herself nodding along. "And that's why crows are basically the best birds," Oliver concluded, closing his binder with a satisfied snap. "Questions?" "I have one," Victoria said. "Okay." "Why Winston?" Oliver blinked. "What? Why did you name him Winston? That's a pretty specific name for a crow." Oliver's face lit up. "Because he looks fancy, like he's wearing a tuxedo. And Winston sounds like a fancy name, like someone who goes to parties and drinks tiny drinks." Mason was trying not to laugh. "Cocktails. The word you're looking for is cocktails." "Yeah, those." Victoria surprised herself by smiling. "That's actually pretty good reasoning." "I know," Oliver said confidently. Then, without warning, "Do you want to come meet him?" "Meet who?" "Winston. He's usually at the park on Saturdays. We go feed him crackers." Victoria looked at Mason, who shrugged. "We usually walk over after coffee. You're welcome to join if you want. No pressure." Everything in Victoria's brain said this was where she should draw the line. Coffee was one thing. Walking to a park to feed crackers to a crow was something else entirely. "Okay," Victoria heard herself say. Oliver jumped out of his chair so fast he nearly knocked it over. "Yes, this is the best day ever!" "Oliver, inside voice," Mason reminded him. "Sorry, this is the best day ever!" Oliver whisper shouted. The park was 6 blocks away. Oliver ran ahead most of the way, occasionally circling back to make sure they were still following. Mason walked beside Victoria in comfortable silence, hands in his pockets, completely unbothered by the chaos surrounding them. "He's always like this?" Victoria asked. "Pretty much. The kid doesn't have an off switch." "That must be exhausting." "Sometimes." Mason glanced at her. "But mostly it's just him. You get used to it." They reached the park, a small neighborhood green space with a couple of benches, a rusty swing set, and a surprising number of trees for being in the middle of the city. Oliver immediately ran to a specific spot near a bench and started digging in his pockets for crackers. "This is Winston's spot," he explained very seriously. "He doesn't like the other side of the park. Too many pigeons." Victoria sat down on the bench while Oliver began making quiet clicking sounds, presumably to summon his crow friend. Mason stood nearby, watching his son with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. "Does the crow actually show up?" she asked quietly. "Usually. Sometimes it takes a while." "And if it doesn't?" "Then Oliver makes up a story about where Winston went and we come back next week." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Oliver kept clicking and arranging crackers on the ground in what he clearly believed was an enticing pattern. Then, from somewhere in the trees above, Victoria heard a distinct caw. Oliver froze. "That's him! That's Winston!" A crow, medium-sized, glossy black feathers, looking exactly like every other crow Victoria had ever seen, landed a few feet away from the crackers. It cocked its head, studying Oliver with one beady eye. "Hi, Winston," Oliver whispered. "I brought crackers. And I brought Victoria. She learned all about crows today because of you." The crow hopped closer, grabbed a cracker, and flew back to a low branch to eat it. Oliver turned to Victoria with the most triumphant expression she'd ever seen on a human face. See? He likes me. I see that, Victoria said, and meant it. For the next 20 minutes, she watched a 6-year-old feed crackers to a crow while providing running commentary on Winston's behavior, mood, and probable thoughts. Mason sat beside her on the bench, occasionally interjecting with gentle corrections when Oliver's narration got too fantastical. He's good at this, Victoria said quietly. At feeding crows? At being a dad? Mason looked surprised. Thanks. I'm just figuring it out as I go. Most people are. Yeah, but most people have a partner helping them figure it out. I'm just winging it, no pun intended. Victoria watched Oliver, who was now trying to teach Winston to respond to hand signals. His mom really just left? Yeah. Mason's voice was even, factual. She was 24 when she got pregnant. I was 26. We weren't married, barely knew each other honestly. When Oliver was born, I think she tried. For about 2 years she tried. But she wasn't ready to be a mom, and every day it got harder for her. One morning I woke up and she was just gone. Left a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. That must have been hard. It was terrifying. I had no idea what I was doing. Still don't most days, but Oliver needed me, so I figured it out. Do you resent her? Mason considered the question. I did at first, but now? I mostly just feel bad for her. She's missing out on this amazing kid. That's her loss, not mine. Victoria watched the crow hop closer to Oliver's outstretched hand. Do you ever hear from her? Birthday cards sometimes. Christmas. She sends child support checks that I put in Oliver's college fund, but she hasn't asked to see him in 4 years. Does Oliver remember her? Not really. He knows he has a mom somewhere, but she's not real to him, you know? She's just an idea. Does he ask about her? Sometimes. I tell him the truth, that she loved him but wasn't ready to be a parent, and sometimes grown-ups make hard choices. He usually accepts that and moves on. Kids are resilient like that. Victoria didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence while Oliver continued his crow negotiations. Eventually, Oliver ran back over, breathless and happy. Winston ate 7 crackers. That's a new record. That's great, buddy, Mason said. But we should probably head home soon. You've got a book report to finish, remember? Oliver's face fell. But I don't want to do my book report. I know, but it's due Monday. Can Victoria help me? Both Mason and Victoria froze. Oliver, Mason said carefully. Victoria's busy. She doesn't have time to, I have time, Victoria interrupted, surprising herself. Again. Mason looked at her. You don't have to be. I know I don't have to, but if Oliver wants help with his book report, I can help. Oliver's eyes went wide. Really? Really? What book did you read? Charlotte's Web. It's about a pig and a spider who are best friends, and it's really sad at the end, but also kind of happy. Victoria stood up. Okay, let's go write a book report. Mason's apartment was exactly what Victoria expected. Small, cramped, organized chaos. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, let alone 3. The living room had a couch that had definitely seen better days and a TV that was older than Oliver. But it was clean, and there were drawings on the fridge, and it smelled like coffee and something baking. Sorry about the mess, Mason said, moving a pile of laundry off the couch. I wasn't expecting company. It's fine, Victoria said, and meant it. Oliver was already dragging her toward a tiny kitchen table that was covered in crayons, paper, and what looked like half a dinosaur puzzle. Okay, so I read the book and I liked it, but I don't know what to write about. Victoria sat down across from him. Tell me about the story. Well, there's this pig named Wilbur, and he's going to get killed and turned into bacon. But then Charlotte the spider saves him by writing words in her web, and everyone thinks it's a miracle, and Wilbur doesn't die, but then Charlotte dies, and it's really sad, and I cried. Those are all good details, Victoria said, but your report needs a focus. What did you learn from the story? Oliver thought hard. That spiders are nice? Deeper than that. That friendship is important? Getting warmer. Oliver scrunched up his face in concentration. That sometimes people, animals, characters, do nice things even when it's hard? Victoria nodded. That's good. Charlotte worked really hard to save Wilbur even though it was difficult for her. That's called sacrifice. What's sacrifice? Mason, who'd been watching from the kitchen, spoke up. It's when you give up something important to help someone you care about. Like when you work extra shifts so we can afford my new shoes, Oliver asked. Mason's expression softened. Yeah, buddy, like that. Oliver turned back to Victoria. Okay, so my book report is about sacrifice? It can be, or it can be about friendship, or it can be about how sometimes the smallest people, or spiders, can make the biggest difference. I like that one. For the next hour, Victoria helped Oliver outline his book report, guiding him through each paragraph, teaching him how to structure his thoughts. Mason brought them snacks, apple slices and peanut butter, and then quietly disappeared into the kitchen to start dinner. By the time they finished, Oliver had a complete draft written in his 6-year-old handwriting, full of misspellings and grammatical errors, but structurally sound. This is really good, Victoria said, and meant it. You think Miss Patterson will like it? I think she'll be impressed. Oliver beamed. Then, without warning, he threw his arms around Victoria in a fierce hug. Thank you for helping me. Victoria froze. She couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged her like that, completely unself-conscious, without agenda or expectation, just pure gratitude. Slowly, carefully, she hugged him back. You're welcome, Oliver. When Oliver finally let go, he ran off to show his dad the finished report, leaving Victoria sitting alone at the table feeling something unfamiliar and uncomfortable in her chest. Mason appeared a few minutes later. Thank you for doing that. You didn't have to. I know. Stay for dinner? Victoria should say no. Should make an excuse, should maintain the distance she'd spent her entire adult life perfecting. What are you making? Spaghetti. Nothing fancy, but there's enough for 3. Victoria looked at the tiny kitchen, the cramped apartment, the man standing in front of her wearing an old t-shirt, and looking at her like she was someone worth knowing. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. Dinner was chaos. Oliver talked non-stop. Mason kept having to tell him to chew with his mouth closed, and Victoria ate spaghetti at a wobbly table while listening to a detailed explanation of why dinosaurs were better than dragons, even though dragons could fly. It was nothing like the quiet, controlled dinners Victoria usually had. Nothing like the expensive restaurants or catered events she attended. It was loud and messy and completely unpolished, and Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this comfortable. When dinner was over and Oliver was finally winding down, Mason walked Victoria to the door. Same time next week? He asked. Victoria looked back at the apartment, at Oliver, who was now building something complicated with blocks on the living room floor, his cape still tied around his neck. Yeah, she said. Same time. Mason smiled. Good. Victoria left the apartment and drove home in her Mercedes, back to her penthouse with its perfect view and expensive furniture, and complete silence. She sat on her pristine white couch and looked around at the life she'd built. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. Everything exactly how she wanted it. Everything except the part of her that wanted to be back in that cramped apartment, eating cheap spaghetti and listening to a 6-year-old talk about crows. Victoria pulled out her phone and stared at Mason's last text message. Then, before she could overthink it, she typed, "Tell Oliver his book report was really good. He should be proud." The response came quickly. "He's already told me 6 times how smart you are. Pretty sure you're his new favorite person." What about Winston? Winston's a crow. Your people. Different categories. Victoria smiled despite herself. Good night, Mason. Good night, Victoria. She set her phone down and sat in the silence of her perfect apartment, knowing with absolute certainty that she was in trouble. The kind of trouble that started with coffee and ended with a broken heart. But she was going back next Saturday anyway. The following Saturday turned into the Saturday after that, which turned into a Tuesday coffee before work, which turned into Victoria finding herself at Mason's apartment on a Thursday night helping Oliver build a model volcano for his science project while Mason burned dinner in the kitchen. It's not supposed to smoke like that, Oliver observed, watching gray clouds drift from the oven. I'm aware, Mason called back, waving a dish towel at the smoke detector before it could go off. Victoria mixed baking soda and vinegar in a measuring cup while Oliver positioned his papier-mâché mountain on a cookie sheet lined with newspaper. Your dad's not much of a cook, is he? He tries really hard, Oliver said loyally, but mostly we eat a lot of sandwiches. And cereal, Mason added, appearing from the kitchen looking defeated. Dinner's ruined. Pizza? Again? Oliver asked. Unless you want sandwiches. Pizza's fine. Victoria watched this exchange with something uncomfortably close to affection. 3 weeks ago, she'd been sitting in her office eating a $12 salad and billing clients $300 an hour. Now she was covered in paste and newspaper, about to eat cheap pizza in an apartment smaller than her closet. And she wasn't entirely sure when she'd stopped minding. Mason ordered the pizza while Oliver carefully poured the vinegar mixture into his volcano. The eruption was underwhelming, more sad fizz than explosive lava, but Oliver acted like they'd just launched a rocket to Mars. Did you see that? Did you see it? That was so cool. Very cool, Victoria agreed, brushing dried paste off her sleeve. Her sweater probably cost $800. She should care more about ruining it. Can we do it again? We should probably save some for the actual presentation, Mason said, returning from the kitchen. Pizza's on its way? 20 minutes. Oliver was already mixing more vinegar. Just one more time, please? Fine. One more. They ended up doing 4 more eruptions before the pizza arrived. By then, Victoria's sweater was definitely ruined, there was red food coloring on Mason's shirt, and Oliver had somehow gotten baking soda in his hair. They ate pizza sitting on the living room floor because the kitchen table was covered in volcano supplies. Oliver talked about his upcoming presentation, about Winston who'd apparently learned to recognize Oliver's backpack, about a girl in his class named Emma who could burp the alphabet. That's disgusting, Victoria said. I know, it's awesome, Oliver said through a mouthful of pepperoni. Chew first, talk second, Mason reminded him for the 3rd time. After dinner, while Mason tried to wrestle Oliver into the bath, Victoria found herself cleaning up the pizza boxes and volcano mess without being asked. She was loading paper plates into the trash when her phone rang. Her mother. Victoria stared at the screen, then silenced it. It rang again 30 seconds later. You going to answer that? Mason asked, emerging from the bathroom looking damp and exhausted. No. Important? The opposite of important. Mason didn't push, which Victoria appreciated. He just grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and handed her one. Oliver's got 20 minutes before bedtime. Fair warning, he's going to try to negotiate for more. Don't fall for it. I'm an attorney. I negotiate for a living. Yeah, but you've never negotiated with a 6-year-old. They have no shame and infinite energy. Mason was right. Oliver emerged from the bathroom in dinosaur pajamas and immediately launched into why he should be allowed to stay up late. His arguments included, it was Thursday, which was basically Friday, which was basically the weekend. He wasn't even tired, delivered mid-yawn, and Victoria was here, which made it a special occasion. Nice try, Mason said. Bed in 20 minutes. 15 minutes? 20. Can Victoria read me a story? Both Mason and Victoria froze. Buddy, Victoria doesn't have to. I can read you a story, Victoria interrupted. Oliver's face lit up. Really? Really? Pick a book. Oliver ran to his room and returned with an armful of books that he dumped on the couch beside Victoria. You can pick, but not the one about vegetables because it's boring and Dad only makes me read it because he thinks I need to learn about nutrition. Mason rubbed his face. That is not why. You know what? Never mind. Victoria sorted through the pile and pulled out a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. This one? That's a good one, Oliver said, climbing onto the couch beside her. Max gets in trouble, but then he becomes king of the monsters and has a wild rumpus, which is basically a big party, but Dad says I can't have a wild rumpus in the apartment because the neighbors will complain. That's exactly why, Mason confirmed. Victoria opened the book and started reading. Oliver leaned against her shoulder, smelling like cheap kid shampoo and toothpaste. His hair was still damp, leaving a wet spot on her ruined sweater. She should mind, should pull away, should maintain some kind of boundary. Instead, she kept reading. By the time Max sailed back home to his bedroom where his dinner was waiting, Oliver was fighting to keep his eyes open. Mason scooped him up without a word and carried him to bed. Victoria could hear their quiet voices from the other room. Mason doing the bedtime routine he'd probably done 1,000 times, Oliver asking for water and one more story and 5 more minutes. When Mason finally emerged, he looked exhausted. Sorry about that, he gets attached fast. It's fine. Is it? Mason sat down beside her on the couch. Not too close, but close enough that Victoria was aware of exactly how much space existed between them. Because you look uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable. You're sitting like you're about to bolt. Victoria forced herself to relax her shoulders. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the volcano mess still spread across the table, at the closed door where Oliver was probably already asleep. I don't know how to be around kids. I don't know what I'm doing here. You're having pizza and helping with homework, that's all. It feels like more than that. Mason was quiet for a moment. Is that a bad thing? Victoria didn't answer because she didn't know. Everything about this situation defied logic. Mason was broke, raising a kid alone, living in a cramped apartment with no prospects for advancement. On paper, he was exactly the kind of person Victoria would never give a second glance. But he was also kind, patient, real in a way nobody in her world ever was. And Oliver was funny and exhausting and completely himself without apology. And somehow, sitting in this tiny apartment eating cheap pizza felt more honest than anything Victoria had done in years. I don't know, she said finally. Fair enough. Mason took a drink of his beer. For what it's worth, I don't really know what I'm doing either. I just figured we could keep not knowing together and see what happens. That's a terrible strategy. Probably, but it's the only one I've got. Victoria's phone rang again. Her mother, third time tonight. You should probably answer that, Mason said. I really shouldn't. Family? Something like that. They worried about you. They're worried I'm 30 and not married. Victoria silenced the call. My mother has a list of acceptable men I should be dating. Stockbrokers, tech executives, trust fund kids, people with the right pedigree and bank accounts. And I'm guessing I'm not on that list. You wouldn't even make the first cut. Mason laughed. Wow. Tell me how you really feel. I'm being honest. My mother would take one look at this apartment and have a heart attack. My father would ask what you do for a living and then spend 20 minutes explaining why structural engineering is a dying field. They'd hate you before you even opened your mouth. Good thing I'm not trying to impress them then. Doesn't it bother you? What, that I'm not rich? That I live in a shitty apartment and drive a car that's one breakdown away from the junkyard? Mason shrugged. I know what my life looks like from the outside, but Oliver's fed, he's happy, he's doing fine in school. We've got a roof and heat and enough money for pizza when I burn dinner. That's enough. Is it, though? You asking me or yourself? Victoria didn't answer. Her phone buzzed with a text. Your father and I expect you for dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. Don't be late. She stared at the message, then set the phone face down on the couch. I should go, she said, standing up. Victoria, thanks for dinner. Tell Oliver good luck with his volcano. She was halfway to the door when Mason's voice stopped her. You're doing it again. Doing what? Running. Every time something feels too real, you bolt. Victoria turned around. I'm not running. I'm leaving. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Running implies I'm scared. I'm just being practical. Right, practical. Mason stood up, hands in his pockets. You know what I think? I'm sure you're going to tell me. I think you're terrified that you might actually like being here, that this might be something you want, and that scares the shit out of you because wanting something means you might lose it. Victoria felt something hot and defensive rise in her chest. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been coming here 3 times a week for a month. I know you helped Oliver with his book report and his volcano and spent 2 hours last Tuesday teaching him about fractions. I know you laugh at his terrible jokes, and you remembered that he doesn't like green peppers on his pizza. Mason paused. I know you keep coming back even though everything about this probably goes against every logical decision you've ever made. Maybe I'm just bored. You're a lot of things, Victoria. Bored isn't one of them. They stared at each other across the small living room. Victoria's hands were shaking. She didn't know if it was anger or fear or something else entirely. I have to go, she said again. This time, Mason didn't stop her. Victoria drove home too fast, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. By the time she reached her building, her hands had stopped shaking, but her chest still felt tight. She rode the elevator to her penthouse, unlocked the door, and stood in the perfect silence of her perfect apartment. Everything in its place, everything controlled, everything exactly how she wanted it. except it didn't feel like enough anymore. Victoria poured herself a bourbon and sat on her white couch, staring at the Seattle skyline. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mason. "You forgot your jacket." Then, a few seconds later, "Oliver wants to know if you're mad at him." Victoria closed her eyes. "I'm not mad at Oliver, but you're mad at me. I'm not mad at anyone." "Then why did you leave like that?" Victoria's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could lie, could make an excuse, could rebuild the walls she felt crumbling. "Because you're right," she typed finally, "and I don't know what to do with that." Mason's response took longer this time. "You don't have to do anything. Just don't disappear. I can't promise that. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking you to show up." Victoria set her phone down and finished her bourbon in one long swallow. Then she picked up her phone again and did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother back. "Victoria, finally, I've been trying to reach you all evening." "I know, Mom, I was busy." "Too busy for your own mother? Really, Victoria, you could at least—" "I can't make dinner Sunday." There was a pause. "What do you mean you can't make dinner? We already made reservations." "Cancel them. I have plans." "What plans could possibly be more important than family dinner?" Victoria looked around her empty apartment. "I'm seeing someone." Another pause, longer this time. "You're dating someone? Why didn't you tell me? Who is he? What does he do?" "He's a structural engineer." "Oh." Her mother's voice brightened considerably. "Well, that's wonderful, darling. Engineers do very well. Is he with a good firm? Does he have his own practice?" "He works for a construction company, and he has a 6-year-old son." The silence that followed was deafening. "He has a child?" Her mother's voice had gone cold. "Victoria, please tell me you're not seriously involved with a single father." "I'm telling you I can't make dinner Sunday." "This is unacceptable. Do you have any idea what kind of complications you're walking into? A child means custody arrangements, child support, a whole mess of legal issues. Not to mention the child himself. You'd be expected to play stepmother to some other woman's—" "His name is Oliver," Victoria interrupted. "And he's 6 years old and obsessed with crows, and he's one of the best people I've ever met." "Victoria, you need to think clearly about this. You're a successful attorney with an incredible career ahead of you. Why would you saddle yourself with someone else's responsibilities? There are plenty of available men without children who would be much better suited—" "I have to go, Mom." "Victoria Ann Langford, don't you dare hang up on—" Victoria ended the call and turned her phone off completely. Then she sat in the silence and waited for the guilt to hit. It didn't come. Instead, she felt something close to relief. The next morning, Victoria showed up at ground control at 10 a.m. like nothing had happened. Mason was already there with Oliver, who was wearing his cape again and coloring aggressively on a stack of napkins. "You came," Oliver said, looking up with a relieved smile. "I said I would." "Yeah, but Dad said sometimes grown-ups say they'll do things, and then they don't because life gets complicated." Oliver shot a pointed look at Mason. "But I said you weren't like that." "Oliver," Mason said quietly. "What? I'm just saying Victoria's reliable. That's a compliment." Victoria sat down across from them. Accepting the coffee, Mason slid toward her. "Thanks." "For the coffee or for not asking questions?" "Both." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. Oliver talked about a math test he'd aced and a substitute teacher who let them have extra recess. Mason listened and nodded and reminded Oliver to use his napkin. Victoria drank her coffee and watched them and tried to figure out what the hell she was doing. After an hour, Oliver announced he needed to use the bathroom and ran off, leaving Victoria and Mason alone at the table. "About last night," Victoria started. "You don't have to explain." "I want to." She took a breath. "I told my mother about you. About Oliver." Mason's eyebrows went up. "How'd that go?" "About as well as you'd expect. She thinks I'm insane. My father will probably agree once she tells him." "And what do you think?" Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. Tired eyes, worn shirt, coffee he probably couldn't really afford, but bought anyway because it was their routine now. "I think I'm still figuring it out," she said honestly. "But I'm here. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything." Oliver came running back, cape flying behind him. "Can we go see Winston? I brought extra crackers today because last week he looked hungry." "Crows always look hungry, buddy. That's kind of their thing." "But what if he really is hungry and we didn't bring enough crackers and he gets sad?" Mason looked at Victoria. a silent question in his eyes. Yeah, Victoria said. Let's go feed your crow. They walked to the park together, Oliver running ahead like always, Mason beside Victoria matching her pace. It was starting to rain, the light Seattle mist that wasn't quite rain but wasn't quite dry either. You hate this weather, Mason observed. What makes you say that? You're from California originally, right? I heard you on the phone with a client last week. You mentioned growing up in San Diego. You were listening to my phone calls? You were having them in my living room. Kind of hard not to. Victoria pulled her jacket tighter. Yeah, I'm from San Diego. Moved here for law school and just stayed. Miss the sunshine? Sometimes, but Seattle has its moments. Like feeding crackers to crows in the rain? Exactly like that. They reached the park. Oliver was already at Winston's spot, setting out crackers in an elaborate pattern that definitely had some kind of 6-year-old logic behind it. The crow showed up within minutes, cawing from a nearby branch before swooping down to investigate the offerings. He came, Oliver whispered excitedly. He always comes when I call him. You didn't call him, Mason pointed out. You just put out crackers. That's how crows know you're calling them, with crackers. Right, Victoria? Victoria sat down on the wet bench, not caring that her pants were getting damp. Seems reasonable to me. For the next 20 minutes, they watched Oliver commune with his crow. Winston seemed particularly bold today, hopping closer than usual, tilting his head at Oliver's running commentary. Do you think he understands English? Oliver asked seriously. Probably not, Mason said. But what if he does, and he's just pretending not to because crows are mysterious? Then he's the best actor in the animal kingdom. Oliver considered this. I should test him. Winston, if you understand me, caw twice. Winston cawed once, grabbed another cracker, and flew off. So close, Oliver said, undeterred. Victoria's phone buzzed. Work email. A crisis with the Mackenzie case. Some new evidence that changed everything. She should leave right now, get to the office, handle it. Instead, she silenced the notification and stayed on the wet bench, watching a 6-year-old try to communicate with a crow while rain misted down around them. You gonna get that? Mason asked. No. Important? Probably, but it can wait. Mason didn't say anything, but Victoria caught the small smile on his face. They stayed at the park until Oliver had exhausted both his cracker supply and his Winston theories. On the walk back to the apartment, Oliver grabbed Victoria's hand without warning or permission, his small fingers wrapping around hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Victoria's first instinct was to pull away, to maintain distance, to remember that she wasn't his mother, wasn't even really dating his father, was just whatever this was. Instead, she held on. Back at the apartment, while Oliver changed out of his damp clothes, Mason made grilled cheese sandwiches that were only slightly burned. You're getting better at this, Victoria observed. Low bar to clear. Still counts as progress. They ate lunch at the tiny kitchen table, Oliver talking nonstop about Winston's behavior patterns and whether crows could recognize individual humans by their faces. They can, Victoria said. I looked it up. Crows have been shown to remember human faces for years. Oliver's eyes went wide. So, Winston knows my face? If he's been seeing you regularly, probably. That means we're really friends. Real friends remember each other's faces. After lunch, Oliver wanted to build a fort in the living room. Within 20 minutes, every blanket and pillow in the apartment had been requisitioned for what Oliver called Fort Awesome, and what Mason called a structural nightmare waiting to collapse. It's fine, Dad. Victoria said it's structurally sound. I absolutely did not say that, Victoria corrected. But you're smart, and you didn't say it would fall down, so that means you think it's fine. That's not how logic works. It's how Oliver logic works, Mason said, helping prop up a particularly unstable corner with a broom handle. They spent the afternoon in the fort, which did eventually collapse twice, playing a card game Oliver invented on the spot with rules that changed every 5 minutes. Victoria should have been at the office handling the Mackenzie crisis. Instead, she was sitting on the floor of a blanket fort, arguing about whether dragons could be blue or if they were strictly red and gold. Dragons can be any color, Oliver insisted, because they're magic. But real dragons were probably lizards, Victoria countered, and lizards are usually green or brown. There are blue lizards. I saw one at the zoo. Those are tropical. European dragons would have been adapted to colder climates. You're thinking about this way too hard, Mason said, laughing. I'm applying logical principles to a fictional creature. That's what lawyers do. Lawyers think about dragon colors? When necessary. Oliver climbed into Victoria's lap without asking, holding up his cards. Can you help me? I think Dad's cheating. I'm not cheating. You just keep changing the rules in your favor. That's called strategy, Dad. Victoria found herself with her arms around a 6-year-old who smelled like peanut butter and rain, feeling something dangerous and warm settle in her chest. This was the moment she should pull back, should remember all the reasons this couldn't work. But Oliver was warm and trusting in her lap. Mason was laughing at his son's creative interpretation of card game rules, and Victoria felt more present than she had in years. Her phone buzzed again. 5 missed calls from the office. 7 urgent emails. She turned it off completely. Everything okay? Mason asked. Yeah, Victoria said, and meant it. Everything's fine. They played cards until Oliver started yawning, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. Mason carried him to his room for what he called a power nap, and what Oliver called not fair because I'm not even tired. When Mason came back, Victoria was folding blankets, trying to restore some order to the living room chaos. You don't have to clean up. I know. I'm doing it anyway. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, putting pillows back on the couch, stacking the cards Oliver had scattered everywhere. Your phone's been going off a lot, Mason observed. Work crisis. I'm ignoring it. Is that wise? Probably not. But I'm doing it anyway. Mason sat down on the couch, watching her. Why? Why what? Why are you here instead of handling your work crisis? A month ago, you would have left the second your phone rang. Victoria folded the last blanket and sat down beside him. Not close enough to touch, but closer than she would have sat a month ago. A month ago, I didn't know you existed. And now? Now I'm sitting in your apartment folding blankets instead of doing my job. Victoria looked at him. I don't know what I'm doing, Mason. I don't know how to do this. Every instinct I have says I should walk away before this gets more complicated. But you're not walking away. No, I'm not. Why not? Victoria thought about it, about the logical answer, the safe answer, the answer that would maintain her walls and her distance. Instead, she told the truth. Because when I'm here, I don't feel empty. And I felt empty for so long I forgot what anything else felt like. Mason reached over and took her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm, solid. Then stay, he said simply. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I'm a mess. Because I don't know how to be around kids. Because my family will hate you and your son. Because I work 80 hours a week and I live for my career and I don't know how to make space for anything else. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Because I'm terrified I'm going to fuck this up. You think I'm not terrified? Mason squeezed her hand. I've got a 6-year-old depending on me for everything. I live paycheck to paycheck. My ex left because she couldn't handle being a parent. What if you realize the same thing? What if Oliver gets attached and you decide this is too hard? Is that what you think will happen? I don't know, but I'm here anyway. They sat in silence, hands linked, both scared and both staying anyway. From Oliver's room came a quiet sound, singing, off-key and sleepy. Mason smiled. He sings himself to sleep sometimes. Kid can't carry a tune to save his life. He gets that from you? Definitely from me. Victoria listened to Oliver's terrible singing and felt something shift in her chest, something final and terrifying and completely inevitable. She was falling for both of them, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do to stop it. 2 months passed like water through fingers, fast and impossible to hold on to. Victoria found herself spending more nights at Mason's cramped apartment than her own penthouse. She kept a toothbrush in his bathroom, spare clothes in a drawer Mason had cleared out without her asking. Oliver started setting 3 plates at dinner automatically. It should have felt too fast, should have triggered every alarm bell Victoria had spent 30 years installing. Instead, it felt inevitable. But inevitable didn't mean easy. I need you in the office, Sarah said over the phone one Tuesday morning while Victoria was helping Oliver find his other shoe. The Henderson deposition got moved up. They want you there in an hour. I can't. Victoria, this is a $12 million case. You need to be here. Oliver was hopping around on one foot. His missing shoe apparently vanished into another dimension. Mason was in the kitchen burning toast again, smoke detector chirping its familiar warning. "I'll be there in 2 hours," Victoria said. "They want you in 1. Then they'll have to wait." She hung up before Sarah could argue, then got down on her hands and knees to look under the couch, where she found Oliver's shoe, a toy dinosaur, and 3 of Winston's feathers that Oliver was apparently collecting. "Found it," she announced. Oliver grabbed the shoe and tried to put it on the wrong foot. Victoria corrected him without thinking, tying the laces while Mason dealt with the smoke situation in the kitchen. "You're really good at that," Mason said, appearing with a plate of slightly burned toast. "At what?" "The whole morning routine thing. You've only been doing this for like 2 months, and you're already better at finding lost shoes than I am." "That's a low bar. Still impressive." Oliver grabbed his backpack, which Victoria had helped him pack the night before because Mason forgot it was library day, and announced he was ready. "Jacket," both Victoria and Mason said simultaneously. Oliver groaned but grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, the one with the permanent crayon stain that would probably outlive them all. Victoria drove them to Oliver's school in her Mercedes, Oliver chattering in the back seat about a spelling test he was definitely going to ace because Victoria had quizzed him last night. Mason sat in the passenger seat looking uncomfortable in a way he always did in her car, like the leather seats and new car smell reminded him of exactly how different their worlds were. "You don't have to drive us every time," he said quietly. "I know. I want to. Your office is in the opposite direction." "I'm aware of geography, Mason. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, and I'm still driving." They pulled up to the elementary school, joining the chaos of morning drop-off. SUVs and minivans everywhere, parents in yoga pants and business suits, kids with backpacks bigger than they were. Oliver unbuckled himself and leaned forward between the seats. "Can you pick me up today?" "I have depositions until 6, Victoria said, "but I'll be at dinner, okay?" "Promise?" "Promise." Oliver hugged her quickly, a gesture that still surprised Victoria every single time, then scrambled out of the car and ran toward the building where his friend Marcus was waiting. Mason watched him go with the expression he always got during drop-off, part relief, part worry, part something Victoria couldn't quite name. "He's fine," Victoria said. "I know, it's just, he's getting so attached to you." "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." Mason looked at her. "What happens when this ends?" "Who says it's going to end?" "Come on, Victoria. You work 90 hours a week at a job you love. I'm barely keeping my head above water raising a kid alone. Your family hates that I exist. My apartment is falling apart. We're running on borrowed time here." Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "So what? We should just end it now? Save everyone the trouble?" "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm scared. Oliver asks about you every morning. He sets a place for you at dinner even when you're not coming. Last week he told his teacher you were his sort of mom, and I didn't correct him because I didn't know what the hell to say." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you think that's a problem?" "I think it's going to be a problem when you realize this isn't what you want. When the reality of dating a broke single dad becomes too much, and you go back to your penthouse and your billion-dollar career. You don't know what I want. Then tell me, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're playing house, but keeping 1 foot out the door just in case." The words hit harder than Victoria expected, mostly because they were true. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight. "I'm late for a deposition." Mason got out of the car without another word. Victoria watched him walk to the bus stop in a rearview mirror, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the rain. She should go after him, should say something, should figure out how to fix whatever was breaking between them. Instead, she drove to her office and buried herself in work. The Henderson deposition was a disaster. The opposing counsel was a shark named Patricia Vance, who'd clearly done her homework and exploited every weak point in Victoria's preparation. By the time they broke for lunch, Victoria had a headache the size of Seattle, and a growing sense that she was losing control of everything. "You okay?" her colleague David asked over coffee in the break room. "Fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you're about to murder someone." "Just Patricia Vance. That's justifiable homicide." David laughed, but his eyes were concerned. "Seriously, though, you've been off your game lately? Everything all right?" "Everything's fine." Because if you need to talk, I don't. Victoria took her coffee back to her office and closed the door. She had 17 new emails, 4 voicemails, and a stack of briefs that needed review by end of day. She should focus, should compartmentalize, should do what she'd always done, put work first and deal with personal shit later. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mason. Sorry about this morning. That wasn't fair. Victoria stared at the message for a long time before responding. You weren't wrong. That doesn't mean I should have said it like that. We should talk. Yeah. Tonight? I'll be there after work. Victoria set her phone down and tried to focus on the Henderson case. She made it 20 minutes before picking up her phone again and scrolling back through her messages with Mason. 2 months of texts. Good morning messages, photos of Oliver's latest drawings, complaints about burned dinners, questions about whether she preferred red or white wine. A whole relationship built in fragments between her real life. Except it was starting to feel like the real life was the one with Mason and Oliver, and everything else was just killing time. Her office door opened without warning. Sarah poked her head in. Your mother's online too. Tell her I'm busy. I tried that. She said she'll just keep calling. Victoria closed her eyes. Fine, put her through. The phone rang. Victoria answered with her professional voice, the one that meant business. Mom. Victoria, we need to talk about this ridiculous situation you've gotten yourself into. I'm at work. Can this wait? No, it can't wait. Your father and I have been trying to reach you for 2 months. You've canceled every family dinner, you won't return our calls, and according to Aunt Marie, you're still seeing that man with the child. His name is Mason, and yes, I'm still seeing him. This is unacceptable. Do you have any idea how this looks? A woman of your stature dating a construction worker with a child? He's a structural engineer, not a construction worker. Same thing. The point is, Victoria, you're throwing your life away on some man who can't even support himself, let alone a family. What future do you think you have with someone like that? Victoria felt anger rising hot and fast in her chest. Someone like what, exactly? You know what I mean. He's beneath you, Victoria, in every measurable way. Income, education, social standing. He's a good man. He's a great father. He treats me like a human being instead of a resume. Oh, please, you sound like a teenager. This isn't about feelings. It's about making smart choices. And this man is not a smart choice. Maybe I don't want to make smart choices anymore. There was a pause. What does that mean? It means I'm tired of living my life according to your checklist. I'm 30 years old and I've done everything you ever asked. I went to the right schools, got the right job, made the right money, and I was fucking miserable. Language, Victoria. No, I'm done. I'm done pretending that money and status matter more than actually being happy. Mason makes me happy, Oliver makes me happy, and if you can't accept that, then what? You'll throw away your family for some man you barely know? I know him better than I know you. When's the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about my career or my relationship status or what the neighbors think? Her mother's voice went cold. I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. The terrible mistake was spending 30 years trying to be the daughter you wanted instead of the person I am. Victoria, I have to go. I have actual work to do. Victoria hung up before her mother could respond. Her hands were shaking. In 30 years, she'd never spoken to her mother like that, never pushed back, never stood her ground. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Sarah appeared in the doorway again, looking nervous. Everything okay? I could hear you from my desk. Everything's fine. Is the Henderson team ready to reconvene? In 20 minutes. But Victoria, if you need... I don't. Let's just get through this deposition. The afternoon was worse than the morning. Patricia Vance was relentless, and Victoria's focus was shot. By the time they wrapped at 6 p.m., Victoria knew she'd lost ground she couldn't afford to lose. She sat in her office after everyone left, staring at case files that might as well have been written in another language. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother, 2 from her father, and 1 text from Mason. Oliver made dinner. Well, he helped. It's only slightly burned. You coming? Victoria looked around her office. 20 floors above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view that cost more than Mason made in a year. None of it mattered. She grabbed her coat and left. Traffic was hell. By the time Victoria reached Mason's apartment building, it was almost 8 p.m. She sat in her car for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what she was going to say. How to explain that she was falling apart, that her mother was right about one thing, this didn't make sense on paper, that Mason was right too. She was keeping one foot out the door because she was terrified of what would happen if she fully committed. Before she could figure it out, her phone buzzed. A picture from Oliver. Blurry, slightly out of focus. Winston the Crow sitting on a park bench. Below it, I thought maybe you were worried. Winston wanted to say hi. Victoria stared at the photo. At a crow she'd never given a damn about 2 months ago. At a message from a 6-year-old who somehow knew exactly what she needed. She got out of the car and went inside. Mason opened the door before she could knock, like he'd been waiting by it. He looked tired, worried. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey, rough day?" You could say that. Oliver appeared behind Mason, wearing his dinosaur pajamas and carrying what looked like a plate of cookies. "Victoria, you came. I told Dad you would come because you promised, and you always keep promises." "Oliver, give her a second to breathe," Mason said. But Oliver was already dragging Victoria inside, pulling her toward the kitchen where dinner was waiting. Spaghetti again, slightly burned garlic bread, a salad that was mostly lettuce and nothing else. "I helped make everything," Oliver announced proudly. "Dad only burned the bread a little bit, and I made cookies for dessert, but they're kind of flat because I forgot the baking powder, but Dad says they'll still taste good." Victoria looked at the table. 3 plates set out, 3 glasses of water, a slightly wilted flower in a jelly jar that Oliver had probably picked from the apartment building's landscaping. "It looks great," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. Oliver beamed. "Sit, you have to try the cookies." They ate dinner with Oliver narrating every detail of his day. The spelling test he'd aced, the game of kickball at recess where he'd scored 2 points, the picture he'd drawn in art class of Winston wearing a tiny crown. Mason was quieter than usual, watching Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. After dinner, while Mason wrangled Oliver into bed, Victoria cleaned up the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher when she heard Oliver's voice from his bedroom. "Is Victoria mad at us?" "No, buddy, she's not mad." "Then why does she look sad?" "Sometimes grown-ups have bad days. It doesn't mean they're mad at you." "But she came anyway, even though she had a bad day." "Yeah, she did. That means she really likes us, right?" "Yeah, Oliver, I think it does." There was a pause, then Oliver's voice again, smaller this time. "Do you think she'll stay?" Victoria's hands froze on the plate she was washing. "I don't know," Mason said quietly. "I hope so." "Me too. Because I really like her. Like, a lot." "I know you do." "Do you like her a lot too?" "Yeah, buddy, I do." "Then we should make her stay. Like maybe we could be extra good and not burn stuff and I could clean my room without you asking and, Oliver, it doesn't work like that. Victoria has to make her own choice. We can't make her stay if she doesn't want to." "But what if she wants to, but she's just scared? Like how I was scared to try the monkey bars, but then I did it and it was awesome?" Mason laughed softly. "Adults are more complicated than monkey bars." "That's stupid. Nothing should be more complicated than monkey bars. Those are really hard." Victoria set the plate down carefully, trying not to make noise. She shouldn't be listening to this. Should announce herself. Should give them privacy. But she couldn't move. "Go to sleep, buddy," Mason said. "Victoria will still be here in the morning. Promise?" "I can't promise that, but I hope so." Victoria heard the sound of covers rustling, Mason's footsteps moving toward the door. She quickly went back to washing dishes, pretending she hadn't heard anything. Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later. They stood in silence while Victoria finished the last plate. "You heard that," Mason said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "All of it?" "Yeah." Mason leaned against the counter. "Look, I know this morning was—" "You were right," Victoria interrupted, "about everything. I'm keeping one foot out the door. I'm scared of committing, and I have no idea what I'm doing." "Victoria, let me finish." She dried her hands on a dish towel, trying to find the words. "I had the worst day. My mother called and told me I was throwing my life away. The deposition was a disaster. I'm losing a case I should be winning. Everything is falling apart." "So why are you here?" "Because this is the only place that makes sense anymore." Victoria's voice broke. Because Oliver sent me a picture of a fucking crow, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. Because you burned dinner and your apartment is falling apart and you have nothing I'm supposed to want, but when I'm here, I feel like I can actually breathe. Mason crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms. Victoria let herself be held, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the smell of burned garlic bread and cheap laundry detergent. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of this. Of losing this. Of fucking it up. Of Oliver getting hurt. Of you realizing I'm not what you need." "Hey!" Mason pulled back just enough to look at her. "You think I'm not terrified? I've got a kid who's already calling you his sort of mom. If this doesn't work out, I'm not the only one who gets hurt. So what do we do?" "I don't know. But I know running doesn't work. I tried that for 2 years after Oliver's mom left. Kept everyone at arm's length. Convinced myself we were fine on our own. And we were fine. But we're better with you here. What if I can't do this? What if I'm too selfish or too damaged, or you made it to dinner on the worst day of your life? You helped my kid with his homework when you had depositions to prep. You learned about crows for no reason except that it mattered to Oliver." Mason tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're already doing it, Victoria. You're just too scared to admit it." Victoria closed her eyes. "I yelled at my mother today, told her I was done living my life according to her rules. How'd that feel?" "Terrifying. And kind of amazing. That's how this feels too. Terrifying and amazing. What if amazing isn't enough? What if it is?" They stood in the tiny kitchen, holding each other while the refrigerator hummed and rain pattered against the windows. Victoria felt something loosening in her chest, something she'd been holding on to for too long. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Okay. I'm falling in love with you, both of you, and that scares me more than anything I've ever felt." Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Good." "Good?" "Yeah, because I'm already in love with you, and I've been scared shitless you were going to realize you could do better and leave." Victoria pulled back to look at him. "Better than you? I'm a broke single dad with a kid, Victoria. You're a billionaire attorney who could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want you. I want Oliver. I want burned dinners and blanket forts and pictures of crows," her voice cracked. "I just don't know how to make it work. We'll figure it out, together." "What if we can't?" "Then we'll fail together. But at least we'll have tried." Victoria kissed him then, desperate and scared and full of too many feelings to name. Mason kissed her back like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "I'm still terrified," she whispered. "Me too. But I'm staying." "Yeah?" "Yeah." They stood in the kitchen holding each other while the city rained outside and Oliver slept in the next room, and everything felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. Victoria's phone rang. Her mother again. She declined the call without looking. "You're really done with them?" Mason asked. "I don't know. Maybe. For now." Victoria looked up at him. "Is that selfish? Is it selfish to choose your own happiness? No. It's called being human." "My mother would disagree." "Your mother isn't here, and she doesn't get a vote in how you live your life." Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from her father this time. "Your mother is very upset. Call her." Victoria turned her phone off completely and set it on the counter. "Stay tonight," Mason said quietly. "Please." "I don't have my stuff. You have a drawer full of stuff. A toothbrush. Oliver already asked me 3 times this week when you're going to officially move in." "Mason, I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to move in. I'm asking you to stay tonight, one night. We'll figure out the rest later." Victoria looked around the tiny kitchen, at the drawing Oliver had made of the 3 of them that was stuck to the fridge with magnets, at the coffee maker that Mason bought specifically because she liked her coffee a certain way, at the life that was being built here in fragments and moments and small everyday choices. "Okay," she said, "I'll stay." But even as she said it, Victoria felt the fear creeping back in. The voice in her head that sounded too much like her mother, listing all the reasons this couldn't work, all the ways it would end badly, all the logical, rational arguments for protecting herself. She pushed the voice away and let Mason lead her to bed, but she couldn't quite make it disappear. The next morning, Victoria woke up to Oliver jumping on the bed at 6 a.m., announcing that it was Friday, which meant pancakes, but they were out of syrup, so could they please go to the store before school? Oliver, it's 6 in the morning, Mason groaned, but we need syrup. Pancakes aren't pancakes without syrup. We have honey. Oliver's face showed exactly what he thought of that suggestion. Honey is for toast, syrup is for pancakes. Those are the rules. Victoria laughed despite the early hour. I'll go get syrup. You don't have to, Mason started. I know. I want to. She threw on yesterday's clothes and drove to the 24-hour grocery store, buying syrup and orange juice and the specific brand of cereal Oliver liked. On the way back, she stopped for coffee at Ground Control, 3 cups, because she knew Mason would need the caffeine. By the time she got back to the apartment, Oliver was in full crisis mode because his lucky shirt was in the laundry, and today was library day and he needed his lucky shirt for library day. Or the librarian, Mrs. Chen, might not let him check out the book about sharks he'd been waiting for. Oliver, Mrs. Chen doesn't care what shirt you're wearing, Mason said patiently. But what if she does? She doesn't. But what if Buddy, we've been through this. Pick a different shirt. Victoria set the syrup on the counter and went to Oliver's room, digging through his clean laundry until she found a blue shirt with a shark on it. Close enough? She asked, holding it up. Oliver's face lit up. Perfect, because it has a shark and I'm getting a shark book, so it's basically the same as luck. Crisis averted. They made it through breakfast. Mason only burned 1 pancake and got Oliver to school on time. As they pulled up to drop off, Oliver turned to Victoria. Are you going to be here when I get home? Victoria hesitated. She had meetings until 7, a dinner with a client that she really shouldn't cancel. I'll be here, she said. Oliver grinned and scrambled out of the car, running toward the building without looking back. Mason was quiet on the drive to drop him at work. You don't have to rearrange your whole schedule for us, he said finally. I know. Victoria, seriously, I appreciate it, but you can't keep canceling work stuff. Why not? Because it's your career. It's important to you. So are you. So is Oliver. I know, but no buts. I'm figuring this out. Let me figure it out. Mason didn't argue, but Victoria could see the concern in his eyes as he got out of the car at the construction site. She made it to the office by 8:30, already mentally rearranging her schedule to make sure she could leave by 5. Sarah took one look at her and raised an eyebrow. You're wearing yesterday's clothes. Observant as always. So it's serious then, with the engineer. His name is Mason, and yes, it's serious. Sarah smiled. Good. You've been less terrifying lately. I'm still plenty terrifying. Yeah, but now you smile sometimes. It's weird, but also nice. Victoria spent the day trying to focus on work, while her mind kept drifting to Oliver's lucky shirts and Mason's burned pancakes and the fact that she'd promised to be home, not at her penthouse, but at Mason's tiny apartment, by the time Oliver got out of school. Home. When had she started thinking of it as home? At 4 p.m., her phone rang. The senior partner, Richard Chen. Victoria, I need you in the conference room. The Mackenzie case just took a turn. I have to leave at 5. This can't wait. It'll have to. I have commitments. There was a pause. Since when do you have commitments more important than a $12 million case? Since now. Victoria, I'll be there first thing Monday morning. We'll handle it then. She hung up before he could argue, her heart pounding. In 10 years at the firm, she'd never prioritized anything over a case, never said no to a partner, never walked out early. At 4:45, she packed up her things and left. The fear followed her all the way to Mason's apartment, whispering that she was making a mistake, that her career was slipping through her fingers, that she couldn't have both. But when she walked into the apartment at 5:20 and found Oliver doing homework at the kitchen table while Mason attempted to make something that smelled suspiciously like burning vegetables, Oliver looked up with a smile that made everything else fade to background noise. You came, he said, like it was a surprise even though she'd promised. I said I would. I know, but sometimes grown-ups say stuff and then they don't because they're busy, but you're not like that. Victoria set her briefcase down and sat beside him. What are we working on? Math. It's stupid. Math isn't stupid. Show me. For the next hour, Victoria helped Oliver with fractions while Mason burned dinner, stir-fry this time, somehow both overcooked and undercooked simultaneously, and everything felt perfectly imperfect. But the fear was still there, lurking at the edges. And Victoria knew that sooner or later she was going to have to face it head on. That fear became a living thing over the next 3 weeks. It woke Victoria up at 3 in the morning, whispering that she was losing herself. It sat beside her in meetings while she checked her phone for texts from Mason. It followed her home. To both homes now, because she still couldn't quite let go of her penthouse, even though she spent most nights at Mason's apartment. Richard Chen called her into his office on a Wednesday afternoon, his expression carefully neutral. "Close the door," he said. Victoria sat down, already knowing what was coming. "The Mackenzie case," Richard began. "We lost the motion to dismiss." "I know. I was there." "You were there physically, but your head was somewhere else." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Victoria, you've been one of our best attorneys for 10 years. Your billable hours were legendary. Your win rate was unmatched. Past tense, because for the last 3 months, you've been a different person. My work is still solid." "Solid isn't what we hired you for. We hired you for exceptional. And lately you're leaving at 5 p.m. You're turning down cases. You canceled a client dinner last week." "I had a personal obligation." "You've never had personal obligations before." Victoria felt her jaw tighten. "People change." "They do. But partnerships don't change. You want to make senior partner, you need to be all in. Not halfway out the door at 5 p.m. to play house with your boyfriend and his kid." The words landed like a slap. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Careful, Richard. That's starting to sound like discrimination." "It's not discrimination to point out that your priorities have shifted. If you want a different kind of life, that's fine. But this firm isn't the place for it. Are you firing me? I'm asking you to figure out what you want. Because right now, you're trying to do everything and you're not doing any of it well." Victoria left his office with her hands shaking and her chest tight. She made it to the bathroom before the panic hit fully, the kind that made her feel like she was drowning on dry land. She was losing her career, the thing she'd built her entire identity around. The thing that made her Victoria Langford, attorney at law, not just another person stumbling through life. But the alternative was losing Mason and Oliver. And somehow that felt worse. Her phone buzzed. A text from Oliver, sent from Mason's phone. "Dad let me use his phone to tell you that Winston brought me a shiny rock today. And I think it means we're best friends now. Also, we're having mac and cheese for dinner because Dad says real cooking is too hard on Wednesdays." Despite everything, Victoria smiled. Then she texted back, "Save me some mac and cheese. I'll be there in an hour." She made it 45 minutes before her phone rang again. Mason this time. "Hey, you okay? Oliver said you seemed sad in your text." "I didn't seem sad. I just said I'd be there." He can read emotions through punctuation now, apparently. Kid's got some kind of sixth sense. Victoria pulled over into a parking lot because her hands were shaking too hard to drive safely. "I think I'm losing my job." Silence on the other end. Then, "What happened?" She told him everything. Richard's words. The failed motion. The accusation that she was playing house instead of focusing on her career. "Playing house," Mason repeated, his voice tight. "That's what he called it?" "Yeah." "And what did you say?" "Nothing. I left." "Victoria." "I don't know what to do, Mason. I've worked my entire life for this career, and now it's falling apart because I'm trying to have something else too, something normal." "Normal," Mason said quietly. "Is that what we are to you? Normal?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Victoria pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. "I meant that I can't do both. I can't be the attorney Richard wants and the person you need. I'm failing at everything." "You're not failing." "I am. I'm losing cases. I'm letting down my clients. I'm barely holding it together." "So what? You're going to quit? Walk away from us because your boss is an asshole?" I don't know what I'm going to do." There was a long pause. Victoria could hear Oliver's voice in the background, asking if everything was okay. "Come home," Mason said finally. "We'll figure it out." "Which home?" "You know which one." Victoria drove to Mason's apartment in a daze. By the time she got there, Oliver was already in his pajamas, setting the table for 3 even though it was barely 6 p.m. "You're here," he said, running over to hug her legs. "Dad made mac and cheese, but the fancy kind from the box that's shaped like cartoon characters. And I saved you the best parts with the most cheese powder." Victoria hugged him back, breathing in the smell of kid shampoo and the slight scent of whatever he'd spilled on himself at school. Mason appeared from the kitchen, his expression unreadable. "Oliver, go wash your hands." "But I already—" Again, extra soap this time. Oliver sighed dramatically but went to the bathroom, leaving Victoria and Mason alone. "I'm sorry about earlier," Victoria said. "I didn't mean—" "You're spiraling," Mason interrupted. "I can see it happening. You're looking for reasons to run. That's not fair, isn't it? Your boss gives you shit about priorities and suddenly you're questioning everything. Again, my career is important to me. I know that. I've never asked you to give it up, but I can't have both." Richard made that clear. Richard is one person at one firm. There are other firms, other options. "I've spent 10 years building my reputation here, and you're miserable." Mason crossed his arms. "You come home, and yeah, I'm calling it home because that's what it is, and you're exhausted. Not the good kind of tired from working hard, the kind of tired that comes from hating what you're doing." "I don't hate it." "Then why do you look relieved every time you leave the office?" Victoria didn't have an answer for that. Oliver came back from the bathroom, hands dripping wet because he'd apparently forgotten about towels. He shook them off like a dog, spraying water everywhere. "Oliver, we've talked about this," Mason said, "but towels are all the way over there." "That's like 3 feet away." "Exactly, so far." They ate dinner at the tiny kitchen table, Oliver narrating his entire day in exhaustive detail. Victoria tried to focus, tried to be present, but her mind kept drifting back to Richard's office, to the cases she was losing, to the career that was slipping away. After dinner, while Mason dealt with Oliver's bath time routine, Victoria stood at the window looking out at the Seattle rain. Her phone kept buzzing with work emails she didn't want to read. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. Dozens from work, 3 from her mother that she'd been ignoring, and 1 from Sarah. "Richard told everyone about your situation. The junior associates are taking bets on how long until you quit. I told them to fuck off, but thought you should know." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Her situation, like falling in love, was some kind of scandal. "You're doing it again," Mason said from behind her. Victoria turned around. "Doing what?" "Looking for the exit." He came to stand beside her at the window. "I can see it on your face. You're building the argument in your head for why this won't work. Maybe it won't. Or maybe you're just scared it will. That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense. If it works, you have to actually commit. You have to choose this, us, over the safe, controlled life you built. And that terrifies you." Victoria looked at him, at this man who saw through every defense she'd ever built. "What if I choose wrong?" "There is no wrong choice. There's just the choice you can live with." "That's not helpful." "I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm trying to be honest." Mason turned to face her fully. "I love you, Victoria. I'm in love with you, and Oliver is too, even if he doesn't have the words for it yet. But I can't keep waiting for you to decide if we're worth the risk." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to figure out what you want, really want, not what your mother wants, or what Richard wants, or what makes sense on paper. What do you actually want?" "I want both," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "I want my career, and I want you, and I want Oliver, and I want to not feel like I'm constantly failing at everything." "You can't have both. Not the way things are now." "So what? I have to choose? My entire career or you?" "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to stop trying to live 2 different lives and actually commit to one." "And if I can't?" Mason's expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Then I need to protect Oliver. He's already calling you his sort of mom. He asks about you every morning. If you're not sure about this, really sure, then I need you to walk away now before he gets hurt worse." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "You're giving me an ultimatum." "I'm asking you to be honest. With yourself and with us." "I am being honest." "No, you're being scared. There's a difference." Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't know how to do this, Mason. I don't know how to be the person you need me to be. I don't need you to be anyone except yourself. But I need you to be all in, not halfway, not 1 foot out the door just in case." Mason took her hand. "I need you to choose us. or I need you to leave so Oliver and I can move on. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. But I've got a kid who deserves stability. And right now, you're anything but stable. Victoria pulled her hand away. So that's it? I either quit my job and move in and play happy family, or I'm out. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. No. What I meant is that I need to know you're committed, that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you're not going to run, because Oliver can't handle you running, and honestly, neither can I. They stood in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of them. From Oliver's room came the sound of singing, off-key and happy, completely unaware of the conversation happening in the next room. I should go, Victoria said quietly. Yeah, probably. She grabbed her coat and her bag, moving toward the door on autopilot. Mason didn't try to stop her. At the door, she turned back. I do love you, both of you. I know. Mason's expression was sad and resigned. But love isn't enough if you're not willing to fight for it. Victoria left the apartment and sat in her car for 20 minutes, crying until she couldn't breathe. Then she drove back to her penthouse, her real home, the one she owned, the one that made sense, and sat in the perfect silence, trying to figure out what the hell she was doing with her life. Her phone buzzed. Not Mason. Her mother. Victoria stared at it for a long time before answering. Victoria, finally, we need to talk about this situation you've gotten yourself into. Not now, Mom. Yes, now. Your father and I have been patient, but this has gone on long enough. You need to end this relationship and focus on your career. I think I just did end it. Her mother's tone shifted slightly. Oh, well, that's good news, I suppose. Though I'm sorry you're hurting, darling. Are you, though? Of course I am. I'm your mother. But sometimes we have to make difficult choices for our own good. Victoria laughed, but it came out bitter. Is that what this is? For my own good? You know what I mean. This man was never right for you. A single father living in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. You deserve better. He is better. He's kind and patient, and he actually sees me as a person instead of an investment portfolio. That's lovely, dear, but kindness doesn't pay bills. You need someone who can match you intellectually and financially. Someone you approve of. Someone who looks good at dinner parties. Someone who checks all your boxes. There's nothing wrong with having standards. Victoria looked around her penthouse, at the expensive furniture she never sat on, at the art she'd bought because it was supposed to be impressive, at the life she'd built according to someone else's blueprint. I have to go, she said. Victoria, don't hang up. We're not done discussing. She ended the call and turned her phone off completely. Then she sat in the silence of her perfect apartment and cried. The next 3 days were a blur. Victoria threw herself into work with a desperation that bordered on manic. She stayed at the office until midnight. She took on 2 new cases she didn't have time for. She rewrote briefs that were already fine. Anything to avoid thinking about Mason's face when she left, about Oliver singing from the other room, about the life she'd walked away from. Sarah noticed immediately. You look like hell, she said, setting coffee on Victoria's desk Friday morning. I'm fine. You're wearing the same suit you wore Wednesday. When's the last time you slept? I sleep. Bullshit. Sarah sat down across from her. What happened? Nothing. I'm focusing on work. Isn't that what everyone wanted? Not like this. You look like you're about to collapse. I said I'm fine. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You ended it with him, didn't you, the engineer? Victoria didn't answer, which was answer enough. Jesus, Victoria, why? Because it wasn't working, because Richard was right. I can't do both. So you chose the job over the guy who made you happy? I chose my career, the thing I've worked for my entire life. And how's that working out for you? Victoria looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been miserable for 3 days. You're barely sleeping, you're snapping at everyone, and you look like you're about to have a breakdown. Doesn't exactly seem like you made the right choice. I made the practical choice. Fuck practical. You were happy with him. I've known you for 8 years and I've never seen you happy until these last few months. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. Happy doesn't pay the bills. Happy doesn't make partner. No, but it makes life worth living. What's the point of making partner if you're alone and miserable? I'm not alone. I have work. I have, work isn't a person, Victoria. Work doesn't love you back. The words hung in the air between them. Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to defend her choice, wanted to explain that she'd done the right thing. Instead, she put her head down on her desk and cried. Sarah came around the desk and put a hand on her shoulder. Go home. I have the Henderson brief. Fuck the Henderson brief. Go home. Sleep. Shower. Figure out what you actually want. I don't know what I want. Yes, you do. You're just too scared to admit it. Victoria went home to her penthouse because she didn't have anywhere else to go now, and slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke up, it was Saturday afternoon and her phone had 17 missed calls. 3 from work, 2 from her mother, 12 from a number she didn't recognize. She called the unknown number back. Victoria? A woman's voice, tentative. Yes? Who is this? This is Emma Patterson, Oliver's teacher. Victoria sat up straight, ice flooding her veins. Is Oliver okay? What happened? He's fine physically, but he's been asking about you all week. He said you're not coming around anymore, and he's pretty upset. I wouldn't normally call, but he gave me your number and asked me to check if you were okay. Victoria closed her eyes. He did what? He's worried about you. He told me you were sad and that's why you left, and he wanted to make sure you were safe. I'm safe. I'm fine. Are you? The question was so direct, so caring, that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. No, she admitted. I'm not. Can I give you some advice? Off the record, as someone who's known Mason and Oliver for 3 years? Okay. That little boy talks about you constantly, shows me pictures you took together, tells me about helping you with homework and feeding crows and building blanket forts. He's never done that before. Not with anyone. Emma paused. I don't know what happened between you and Mason, but Oliver loves you, and kids that age don't love easily. If you walked away because you're scared, maybe you should think about what you're actually afraid of. I'm afraid of failing, of not being enough. For who? For them. Because from where I'm sitting, you're already more than enough. You just have to believe it. After they hung up, Victoria sat in her apartment staring at the phone. Then she opened her photos and scrolled back through the last 3 months. Oliver's volcano presentation. The 3 of them at the park with Winston. Mason burning dinner while Oliver laughed in the background. Blanket forts and homework sessions and ordinary moments that somehow meant everything. A life she'd walked away from because she was too scared to fight for it. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but she recognized the clumsy typing immediately. Hi, Victoria, it's Oliver. Dad doesn't know I have his phone. Are you okay? I miss you. Winston misses you too. He keeps looking for you at the park. Dad says you're busy, but I think you're sad. You can come back if you want. We won't be mad. Love. Oliver. Victoria read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she did something she should have done 3 days ago. She got in her car and drove through the rain, not to the office, not to her mother's house, but to the only place that had ever felt like home. The apartment building looked the same. Victoria stood outside in the rain for 5 minutes, trying to find the courage to go inside. What if Mason didn't want her back? What if she'd hurt them too badly? What if... The door opened. Not Mason, Oliver. He stood in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, bare feet on the concrete, staring at her like he couldn't quite believe she was real. You came, he said quietly. I came. Are you still sad? Yeah, buddy, I'm still sad. That's okay. Dad says it's okay to be sad sometimes. You just have to tell people so they can help. Victoria walked toward him, crouching down to his level. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I scared you. Oliver threw his arms around her neck, holding on like she might disappear. It's okay. I forgive you. But you can't leave again, okay? Because Winston really misses you, and also I miss you, and also Dad cries at night when he thinks I'm asleep. Oliver. Mason's voice came from inside the apartment. What are you... He appeared in the doorway and stopped short when he saw Victoria. They stared at each other across the threshold, Victoria soaking wet from the rain, Mason looking exhausted and wary and hopeful all at once. Hi, Victoria said. Hi. Can we talk? Mason looked at Oliver, who was still clinging to Victoria. Buddy, go inside. But inside, Now. Oliver reluctantly let go and ran back into the apartment, though Victoria could see him peeking around the doorframe. Mason stepped outside, closing the door behind him. They stood in the rain, neither one reaching for the other. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I got scared. I'm sorry I hurt you and Oliver." "Why are you here, Victoria?" "Because I made a mistake. Because I chose wrong. Because I've been miserable for 3 days, and I can't keep pretending that my career is enough." She took a breath. "Because I love you. And I love Oliver. And I want to be here even though it terrifies me." "What changed?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." Victoria ran a hand through her wet hair. "I spent 3 days trying to convince myself I made the right choice. But all I could think about was Oliver singing and your burned dinners and feeding crackers to a crow I didn't even like at first. And I realized that I'd rather fail at this, at us, than succeed at a life that makes me miserable." "What about your job, your career?" "I'm going to figure it out. Maybe I'll leave the firm. Maybe I'll work part-time. Maybe I'll find a place that doesn't require me to choose between having a life and having a career. I don't have all the answers." She stepped closer. "But I know I want to be here, with you, with Oliver. If you'll have me back." Mason was quiet for a long time, rain streaming down his face. "You heard him, Victoria. He's been asking about you every day. Worried you were sick or upset. I had to explain that sometimes adults make mistakes without knowing how to explain that you chose to leave." "I know, and I'll spend as long as it takes making it up to him." "What if you get scared again? What if it gets hard and you run?" "I probably will get scared. It definitely will get hard. But I'm asking you to let me try, to let me fail and mess up and figure it out as I go." Victoria's voice broke. "I'm asking you to give me another chance. Please." Mason looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the door. "Oliver," he called. "Get out here." Oliver appeared immediately, looking between them with worried eyes. "Victoria wants to come back," Mason said. "What do you think?" Oliver's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really?" "Really," Victoria said. "If you'll let me." Oliver ran to her, nearly knocking her over with the force of his hug. "Yes, yes, yes, yes. But you have to promise not to leave again. Pinky promise." Victoria held out her pinky. Oliver wrapped his around it with the solemnity of a legally binding contract. "I promise," she said. "I'll mess up sometimes. And I'll get scared sometimes. But I promise I won't run." "Okay, now you have to stay for dinner. Dad's making grilled cheese and they're only a little bit burned." Oliver ran back inside, already yelling about how Victoria was back and they needed to set 3 plates. Mason and Victoria stood alone on the doorstep, rain falling around them. "I meant what I said," Victoria told him. "I'm all in. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm done keeping one foot out the door." "It's going to be messy." "I know. Your family's still going to hate me." "I know. Your job's still going to be complicated." "I know." Victoria stepped closer. "But I'd rather have messy and complicated with you than perfect and empty alone." Mason pulled her into his arms, and Victoria felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like coming home. "Don't make me regret this," he said quietly. "I'll try not to." They stood in the rain, holding each other, while Oliver yelled from inside about how the grilled cheese was getting cold, and could they please hurry up with the kissing stuff because he was hungry. Victoria laughed against Mason's chest. "We should probably go inside." "Probably." But they stood there a minute longer, rain soaking through their clothes, neither one wanting to let go. Finally, Mason pulled back and took her hand. "Come on, let's go have some burned grilled cheese." They walked inside together where Oliver was already at the table with 3 plates set out, looking proud of himself. "See? I knew you'd come back," he said. "How'd you know?" Victoria asked. "Because you always keep your promises, even when you're scared." Victoria looked at the 6-year-old who somehow understood her better than she understood herself and felt her heart crack open in the best possible way. "You're right," she said. "I do." They ate burned grilled cheese and canned soup, while Oliver narrated everything Victoria had missed over the last 3 days. Winston had brought him 2 more rocks. His friend Marcus had thrown up during lunch, which was gross but also kind of cool. He'd gotten 100% on his spelling test. Normal. Ordinary. Perfect. After dinner, while Mason put Oliver to bed, Victoria cleaned up the kitchen and tried to figure out what happened next. She couldn't keep working 100-hour weeks, couldn't keep choosing between her career and her life. Something had to give. Mason found her later, standing at the window staring out at the rain. "You're thinking too hard," he observed. "I need to quit my job." "You don't have to, I do. Richard made it clear it's all or nothing, and I can't give them all anymore. I don't want to." "What will you do?" "I don't know. Maybe open my own practice. Something smaller, more flexible." Victoria turned to face him. "I've spent my whole life building someone else's version of success. Maybe it's time to figure out what mine looks like." Mason pulled her close. "That sounds terrifying." "It is, but less terrifying than losing this." They stood together in the quiet apartment, holding each other while the city rained outside. Oliver's door opened slightly, and a small voice called out, "Victoria, are you staying tonight?" Victoria looked at Mason, who nodded. "Yeah, buddy," she called back. "I'm staying." "Forever?" Mason and Victoria looked at each other. It was too soon for forever. Too soon for promises they might not be able to keep. But Victoria thought about pinky promises and crow feathers and the way Oliver's hand felt in hers. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Forever." Oliver's door closed with a satisfied click. Mason raised an eyebrow. "Forever's a long time." "I know. You sure about this?" "No. But I'm doing it anyway." He kissed her then, soft and certain, and Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Monday morning, Victoria walked into Richard Chen's office and set her resignation letter on his desk. He looked at it without picking it up. "You're serious?" "Completely." "You're throwing away a partnership track position to what? Play stepmom to some guy's kid?" Victoria felt anger flash hot through her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I'm leaving because I want a life outside these walls. And honestly, Richard, if that's a problem for you, then this isn't the kind of place I want to be anyway. You'll regret this. Maybe. But I'll regret staying more." She cleaned out her office that afternoon while Sarah helped pack boxes and pretended not to cry. "You're really doing this," Sarah said, wrapping a framed degree in newspaper. "I'm really doing this." "What's the plan?" "I'm opening my own practice. Small cases, reasonable hours. Clients I actually give a damn about." Victoria packed the last of her books into a box. "I'm going to fail spectacularly, probably. Or you'll succeed on your own terms." That sounds like something from a motivational poster. Doesn't make it less true. Victoria looked around the office she'd occupied for 10 years. Everything that had defined her success was packed into 6 cardboard boxes. It should feel like loss, like failure. Instead, it felt like freedom. She drove to Mason's apartment with her boxes in the trunk and hope in her chest. Oliver was already home from school, doing homework at the kitchen table, while Mason attempted to make something that smelled suspiciously like burning chicken. "You're early," Mason said, looking surprised but pleased. "I quit my job today." Mason turned off the stove. "You what?" "I resigned, effective immediately. Richard tried to guilt trip me. I told him to fuck off. Well, professionally, but the sentiment was there." Oliver looked up from his math worksheet. "You said the F word?" "Oliver, focus on your homework," Mason said, though he was staring at Victoria like she'd just announced she was moving to Mars. "But she said—" "I know what she said. Homework." Oliver went back to his math, but Victoria could see him smiling. Mason pulled her into the bedroom, closing the door behind them. "Victoria, you can't just quit your job without a plan." "I have a plan. I'm starting my own practice." "With what money? Office space in Seattle is expensive as hell." "I have savings, and I don't need fancy office space. I can work from home until I build up clients." "And what home is that exactly?" Mason asked carefully. "Because you still have a penthouse you're paying for while you're here most nights." Victoria had been avoiding this conversation for weeks. "About that." "Yeah?" "I want to give up my lease, move in here, officially." Mason was very still. "That's a big step." "I know." "My apartment is tiny. There's barely room for me and Oliver, let alone 3 people. Then we'll find a bigger place. Together. Something we can actually afford on your salary and whatever I make from the practice." "Victoria, you're talking about going from a penthouse to a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that's not exactly upscale. Are you sure about this? No, I'm terrified, but I'm doing it anyway. Mason pulled her close, and Victoria breathed in the smell of burned chicken and cheap laundry detergent and felt more at home than she ever had in her expensive apartment. Okay, he said quietly. Let's do it. They told Oliver over dinner. The burned chicken had been salvaged into something almost edible with enough ketchup. Wait, so Victoria's going to live here? Like all the time? Oliver asked, his eyes huge. If that's okay with you, Victoria said. Are you kidding? That's the best thing ever. Can we get bunk beds? Because my room is small, but if we had bunk beds, then we could share and… Buddy, Victoria's not sleeping in your room, Mason interrupted. Oh, right. Oliver thought about this. So she's sleeping in your room? Yeah. Like grown-ups do when they really like each other? Exactly like that. Oliver considered this information carefully. Does this mean you're getting married? Victoria and Mason looked at each other. They hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't even said the word out loud, but Oliver was looking at them with such hope that Victoria felt her heart crack open. We're not there yet, buddy, Mason said gently, but we're together. That's what matters. But you love each other, right? Yes, Victoria said before Mason could answer. We love each other. Then you should get married. That's what people do when they love each other. It's like a rule. It's more complicated than that, Mason said. Why? You love her. She loves you. I love both of you. Seems pretty simple to me. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds, Victoria thought. Maybe it really was that simple. The next 2 months were chaos. Victoria gave up her penthouse lease, moved her belongings into Mason's cramped apartment, and set up a makeshift office in the corner of the living room. She took on her first 3 clients, small cases, nothing glamorous, but work that actually mattered to real people with real problems. Mason's landlord informed them that 3 people in a 1-bedroom apartment violated the lease terms, so they started apartment hunting with a budget that made Victoria's old life seem like a distant dream. Everything in their price range was either too small, too far from Oliver's school, or too close to the freeway. This is impossible, Victoria said after viewing their 8th apartment in 2 weeks. How does anyone afford to live in this city? Very carefully, Mason said, and with a lot of compromises. They finally found a 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better days but was close to Oliver's school and within their budget. The kitchen was smaller than Victoria's old closet. The bathroom had questionable plumbing. The neighbors upstairs sounded like they were training elephants. It's perfect, Victoria said, and meant it. They moved in on a Saturday with help from Sarah and a couple of Mason's co-workers. Oliver helped by carrying his stuffed animals one at a time from the old apartment to the new one, making each trip an epic journey that required elaborate commentary. This is Mr. Fuzzy's first time seeing the new place, he announced, holding up a bedraggled teddy bear. He's nervous but excited. Mr. Fuzzy needs to be less nervous and more helpful, Mason said, carrying a box of kitchen supplies past them. By evening, they'd moved everything and assembled approximately half of Oliver's bed frame before realizing they had the wrong screws. They ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of their new living room, surrounded by boxes and chaos. This is a disaster, Victoria observed. Yep, Mason agreed. I love it. Yeah, me too. Oliver fell asleep on a pile of blankets before they could find his actual bed, so Mason carried him to his new room and improvised a sleeping arrangement on the floor. Victoria stood in the doorway watching, thinking about how much her life had changed in 6 months. You okay? Mason asked, coming to stand beside her. I'm perfect. Which is weird because, objectively, this is a disaster. Welcome to my life. Disaster is kind of our baseline. I can work with that. They finished unpacking at midnight, then collapsed into their own bed, which they'd managed to assemble correctly through sheer determination and YouTube tutorials. Victoria stared at the ceiling, listening to the neighbors upstairs and the traffic outside and Oliver's quiet breathing from the next room. I can't believe I used to live in a penthouse, she said. Having regrets? Not even a little bit. Mason rolled over to look at her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why me? Really? You could have anyone. Someone with money, someone who doesn't come with a kid, someone who… Victoria put her hand over his mouth. Stop. You want to know why? Because you're the first person who ever saw me as just Victoria, not Victoria Langford, attorney at law. Not the billionaire's daughter, just me. and that's worth more than money or status or anything else. Mason kissed her palm. That's a good answer. I know. I'm a lawyer. I'm good at answers. Former lawyer. Technically current lawyer. Just a broke one now. They fell asleep tangled together in their new bedroom, in their imperfect apartment, in the life they were building one disaster at a time. Victoria's practice grew slowly. She took cases other attorneys wouldn't touch, small claims, landlord disputes, family law for people who couldn't afford the big firms. The money was terrible compared to what she used to make, but she went home each night feeling like she'd actually helped someone instead of just shuffling papers for corporations. 3 months after moving in together, Mason came home early from work looking nervous. "We need to talk," he said. Victoria looked up from the brief she was reviewing at their kitchen table. Those 4 words never meant anything good. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. He pulled out a chair and sat down, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. "Oliver's been asking about you a lot lately." "Asking what?" "About whether you're staying, whether this is permanent, whether you're going to be his mom." Victoria's chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I don't know what the future holds, but that we love him and we're doing our best." Mason took her hand. "But the thing is, I do know. At least, I know what I want the future to be." "Mason, let me finish. I know we've only been together for 6 months. I know this is fast. I know you've already upended your entire life for us. But I also know that I love you, and Oliver loves you, and I want you to be part of our family. Officially." He pulled a small box from his pocket and set it on the table between them. Victoria stared at it like it might explode. "Is that?" "It's my grandmother's ring. It's not fancy. It's probably not what you're used to, but it's real, and it's mine, and I want you to have it." "Mason, You don't have to answer right now. I just needed you to know that I'm all in, completely, forever, if you'll have me." Victoria opened the box with shaking hands. The ring was simple, a small diamond in a gold band worn smooth from years of wear. It was perfect. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So is that a yes?" "I have to tell you something first." Victoria took a breath. "My family, they're going to hate this. My mother will probably disown me. My father will definitely try to talk me out of it. They'll say you're using me for money even though I don't have money anymore. They'll say I'm ruining my life. I know. And I don't care. I choose you. I choose Oliver. I choose this life even if it means losing them." Mason pulled her into his arms. "You're not losing anything. You're gaining us." "Is that a good trade?" "I think so. But I'm biased." Victoria laughed, crying at the same time. "Ask me." "What?" "Properly. Ask me properly." Mason got down on one knee right there in their tiny kitchen, holding the ring like it was made of diamonds and hope. "Victoria Langford, will you marry me?" "Yes." "Absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her, and kissed her while somewhere in the apartment Oliver started singing off-key in the shower, completely oblivious to the fact that his family had just gotten bigger. They told Oliver the next morning over breakfast. Mason had attempted pancakes and only burned 3 of them. "Oliver, Victoria and I have something to tell you," Mason started. Oliver looked up from his pancake, syrup already on his chin. "Are we getting a dog?" "No, buddy. Better than a dog." "Nothing's better than a dog." "We're getting married," Victoria said. Oliver blinked, processed this information. Then his face split into the biggest smile Victoria had ever seen. "So you're going to be my mom? Like, for real?" "If that's okay with you." "Are you kidding? That's the best thing ever." Oliver jumped out of his chair and hugged Victoria so hard he knocked over his orange juice. "Can I call you Mom now? Or do I have to wait until after the wedding?" Victoria looked at Mason, who nodded. "You can call me whatever you want." "Mom," Oliver said, testing it out. "Mom, that sounds good. Hey, Mom, can you pass the syrup?" Victoria handed him the syrup with tears streaming down her face. Mason reached over and squeezed her hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm perfect." And for the first time in her life, she actually meant it. Telling her parents was harder. Victoria drove to their house alone, knowing this conversation needed to happen face to face. Her mother answered the door looking surprised. Victoria, we weren't expecting you. I know. Can I come in? They sat in the formal living room, the one reserved for guests and important conversations. Victoria's father joined them, looking stern and unapproachable as always. I'm getting married, Victoria said without preamble. Her mother's face went pale. To the engineer, Victoria, please tell me you're joking. I'm not joking. We're getting married in the spring. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Absolutely not, her father said. I forbid it. I'm 30 years old, Dad. You don't get to forbid anything. This man is using you. He sees dollar signs, not a daughter. He doesn't care about money. I don't even have money anymore. I quit my job, remember? I'm living in a 2-bedroom apartment and taking cases that barely pay rent. Her mother looked horrified. This is worse than we thought. Victoria, you need to end this before you ruin your life completely. My life isn't ruined. It's finally starting. You've thrown away everything we worked for, everything we gave you. No, I threw away the life you wanted me to have. There's a difference. Victoria stood up. I love him. I love his son, and I'm going to marry him whether you approve or not. But I'd like you to be there. I'd like you to be part of my life. If you do this, you're choosing him over your family, her mother said coldly. If that's how you want to frame it, then yes, I'm choosing him. But you're the ones making me choose. You could accept this, accept that I'm happy. But you won't because it doesn't fit your perfect picture. Her father stood. Then I think this conversation is over. When you come to your senses, we'll be here. But until then, I don't think we have anything more to say to each other. Victoria felt something break in her chest, but she'd known this was coming. Okay, then I guess this is goodbye. She walked to the door, hoping one of them would call her back, would say they were wrong, would choose their daughter over their pride. Neither of them spoke. Victoria drove back to the apartment with tears streaming down her face. Mason took one look at her expression and pulled her into his arms without asking questions. They said no, she said into his chest. I'm sorry. They gave me an ultimatum, you or them. And you chose me. I chose us, but it still hurts. I know, sweetheart, I know. Oliver appeared from his room, saw Victoria crying, and immediately came over to hug her legs. Are you sad, Mom? The word, Mom, made Victoria cry harder, but also made something warm bloom in her chest. Yeah, buddy, I'm a little sad. Do you want to go see Winston? He always makes me feel better when I'm sad. Victoria looked at Mason, who shrugged. Crow therapy? Why not? They walked to the park in the rain, Oliver holding Victoria's hand and chattering about his day. Winston showed up within minutes, cawing from his usual branch before swooping down to investigate the crackers Oliver had brought. See, Oliver said, Winston always knows when we need him. Victoria watched the crow hop around, accepting crackers and tilting his head at them like he understood more than he should. You might be right. They stayed at the park until the rain got heavier, then walked home together, the three of them, a family even if Victoria's parents refused to see it. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Mason found Victoria sitting on their tiny balcony, looking out at the city. You're going to catch a cold, he said, draping a blanket over her shoulders. I'm fine. You're allowed to not be fine, you know. Your parents basically disowned you today. I know, but I also know I made the right choice. Victoria looked at him. My mother was right about one thing. I did throw away everything she worked for, the career, the status, the perfect life. But what she doesn't understand is that I wasn't throwing it away. I was trading it for something better. A broke engineer and his weird kid? A man who loves me for who I am and a kid who calls me Mom. Yeah, that's better. Mason sat beside her, pulling her close. For what it's worth, I think you're pretty amazing. Just pretty amazing? Incredibly amazing. Spectacularly amazing. All the amazings. That's better. They planned the wedding for April, in a small park by the water. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just the people who mattered. Sarah helped Victoria pick a dress. Simple white lace, nothing like the elaborate gown her mother had always imagined. Oliver insisted on being the ring bearer and spent weeks practicing walking slowly and seriously. I'm going to do the best job, he told Victoria the week before the wedding. Nobody has ever carried rings better than I'm going to carry these rings. I believe you. Are you nervous? A little bit. Why? You love Dad and Dad loves you. That's all that matters. When did you get so wise? I was born wise. I just act silly so people don't feel intimidated. Victoria laughed. That's very considerate of you. The day before the wedding, Victoria's phone rang. Her mother. She stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hello? Victoria. Her mother's voice was stiff, formal. I'm calling about tomorrow. What about it? Your father and I have discussed it. We'll attend, briefly, but don't expect us to participate or celebrate this mistake you're making. Victoria felt anger and hurt war in her chest. Then don't come. I don't want you there if you're going to spend the whole time making everyone uncomfortable. Victoria, Bo, I mean it, Mom. I'm marrying the man I love. He's a good person. Oliver is the best kid I've ever met. And if you can't be happy for me, really happy, not just tolerating it, then I don't want you there. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, Are you really happy? Yes, happier than I've ever been. Even without the money? The career? Everything you worked for. I'm still working, Mom. Just differently. And the money never made me happy anyway. It just made everything look good from the outside. Another pause. I don't understand you anymore. I know, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to understand each other. We just have to love each other anyway. Her mother was quiet for so long Victoria thought she'd hung up. Then, we'll be there, and we'll try to be happy for you. That's all I can promise. That's enough. They hung up. Victoria sat staring at her phone, not sure if that conversation had made things better or worse. Mason found her later, still sitting in the same spot. Everything okay? My parents are coming to the wedding. That's good, right? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. Hey. Mason turned her to face him. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're getting married. That's all that matters. You're right. Say that again. I want to record it. Shut up. He kissed her, soft and certain. Love you. Love you too. The wedding day dawned gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather. Victoria got ready in Sarah's apartment while Mason and Oliver got ready at home. When Victoria saw herself in the mirror, simple dress, barely any makeup, hair pulled back in a loose braid, she barely recognized herself. She looked happy. You ready for this? Sarah asked, adjusting Victoria's veil. Yeah, I really am. They drove to the park together. The ceremony was set up under a cluster of trees strung with lights. 20 people sat in folding chairs. Mason's co-workers, a few of Victoria's old colleagues who'd stayed in touch, Oliver's teacher, Emma Patterson, and in the back row, looking uncomfortable and out of place, Victoria's parents. Mason stood at the front in a suit Victoria had never seen before, probably borrowed, with Oliver beside him holding a pillow with 2 rings tied to it. When Mason saw Victoria, his whole face changed, like she was the only person in the world. She walked toward him alone, no father to give her away because she was giving herself, and took his hands. The ceremony was short and simple. No religious elements, no elaborate vows written months in advance. Just 2 people promising to love each other through whatever came next. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Mason pulled Victoria close and kissed her like he meant it. Oliver whooped from beside them, nearly dropping the rings in his excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Cole." Victoria turned to face their guests, Mason's hand in hers, Oliver between them holding both their hands. Her parents were crying, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her father's jaw tight but his eyes wet. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe they never would. But they were there. At the reception, held in a community center with a potluck dinner because catering was expensive, Victoria's mother approached her. "You look happy," she said stiffly. "I am happy." "He treats you well?" "He treats me like I matter." Her mother nodded slowly. "That's good. That's what's important." It wasn't an apology, wasn't acceptance, not really, but it was a start. Victoria's father shook Mason's hand and told him gruffly that he'd better take care of his daughter. Mason promised he would. Oliver spent the reception showing anyone who would listen the rings he'd carried without dropping. Winston made an appearance outside the window, drawn by the commotion, and Oliver insisted on taking him some crackers. "Even birds should celebrate weddings," he said seriously. As the evening wore on and people started to leave, Victoria found herself standing with Mason on the small balcony of the community center, watching the rain fall over Seattle. "We did it," Mason said. "We really did." "Any regrets?" Victoria thought about her old life, the penthouse, the career, the perfect exterior that hid an empty interior. Then she thought about burned dinners and blanket forts, and a 6-year-old who taught her that family wasn't about biology or perfection. Not a single one! Oliver appeared in the doorway, his fancy clothes already rumpled, his tie hanging loose. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." "Yeah, buddy," Mason said. "Let's go home." They drove back to their small apartment in Mason's beat-up Honda, Oliver falling asleep in the back seat, still clutching the ring pillow. Mason carried him inside while Victoria unlocked the door, stepping into the space that was somehow too small and exactly right all at once. "Home," she said quietly. "Home," Mason agreed. They put Oliver to bed. He barely woke up, just mumbled something about Winston before falling back asleep, and then stood in their tiny bedroom looking at each other. "So," Mason said, "we're married." "Apparently." "How does it feel?" Victoria thought about it, about the ring on her finger that wasn't worth much in dollars but meant everything in what it represented, about the life she'd chosen over the one she was supposed to want. "It feels right," she said finally. "Scary and uncertain and probably going to be really hard sometimes, but right. I can work with that." They fell asleep tangled together, rain pattering against the window, a child sleeping in the next room, 2 lives becoming one imperfect, beautiful whole. 6 months later, Victoria was in their kitchen attempting to make dinner. She'd gotten marginally better at not burning things, when Oliver came home from school with a paper in his hand. "We're supposed to write about our family for homework," he said. "Can you help?" "Of course. What do you want to say?" Oliver climbed onto a chair at the kitchen table, chewing on his pencil. "Well, I have a dad who's really good at building stuff, but really bad at cooking. And I have a mom who used to be a fancy lawyer, but now helps regular people. And we live in a small apartment, and we eat a lot of pizza, and sometimes we go feed crackers to my best friend Winston, who's a crow." "That sounds perfect," Victoria said. "But the assignment says to write about what makes your family special. And I don't know if that's special. It's just normal." Victoria sat down beside him, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, about the woman she used to be, polished, controlled, empty, and the person she'd become. Messier, more uncertain, but infinitely more real. "You want to know what I think makes our family special?" she asked. "Yeah, we chose each other. Your dad and I could have walked away a dozen times. It would have been easier, made more sense on paper. But we kept choosing to stay, to try, to build something together even when we didn't know what we were doing." Oliver wrote this down carefully. "Is that enough for the assignment?" "I think so. But you could also add that we love each other, even when things are hard, especially when things are hard." "Okay." He wrote some more, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Then he looked up. "Mom?" "Yeah, buddy?" "I'm glad you chose us." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes for about the 100th time since becoming Oliver's mother. "Me too." That night, after Oliver was asleep and Mason was tinkering with something in the other room, Victoria stood at their balcony door looking out at the city. Her phone buzzed with an email from a new client, a woman going through a messy divorce who couldn't afford the big firms. Real work. Work that mattered. Behind her, she could hear Mason humming off-key while he assembled Oliver's new bookshelf. From Oliver's room came the quiet sound of sleep breathing, peaceful and safe. This was her life now. Small apartment, modest income. A family built from spare parts and second chances. Nothing she'd planned. Nothing she'd expected. Everything she needed. Mason came to stand beside her, slipping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I used to think success meant having the biggest office and the fattest paycheck. And now? Now I think it means coming home to people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them." "That's very profound. You should write that down." "Shut up." He kissed her neck. "Love you." "Love you too." They stood together watching the rain fall over Seattle, in an apartment that was too small, with a life that made no sense on paper, building something that couldn't be measured in dollars or status or any of the metrics Victoria used to think mattered. And for the first time in 30 years, Victoria Langford, now Victoria Cole, wasn't afraid. Because she'd learned something important in the journey from that first night in a dive bar to this moment in a cramped apartment. Love wasn't about coming in second place. It wasn't about sacrifice or compromise or losing yourself. Real love was about becoming more yourself than you'd ever been alone. It was found in ordinary moments, in burned dinners and homework help, in feeding crackers to crows and building blanket forts, in choosing to stay even when leaving would be easier. And standing there with Mason's arms around her and Oliver sleeping safely in the next room, Victoria finally understood what she'd been searching for her whole life. Not perfection, not success, not approval from people who would never understand, just this, just home, just family, just enough.